The reservation is set for 7 people. This individual will have a separate seat, please. That cheerful voice belonged to my mother-in-law, who always finds joy in teasing me. But today, everything changes. Armed with a secret, I've decided it's time to reveal all to our relatives. My name is Emily. I'm 28 and work as a chef. I met my husband, Chris, at a popular restaurant where I worked after culinary school. Chris manages his family's electronics store, a business passed down for 3 generations. After his father's passing last year, Chris became the 3rd-generation owner. I come from a simple family, but cooking runs in our blood. My parents and older brother are all chefs, and I've been cooking since childhood. With talent and hard work, I graduated top of my class. Cooking has always been my passion, but things changed after marrying Chris. Right after we tied the knot, I moved in with my mother-in-law. Chris had always lived at home, and with his father's recent passing, he felt it was necessary for me to be there to support his mother. I had imagined our married life eagerly, knowing that eventually, as the eldest son, we would reside with his mother. However, I hadn't anticipated it happening so soon. Maybe I should have expressed my concerns before marriage, but given the circumstances, I didn't want to seem difficult. Nonetheless, what's done is done. However, when we initially moved in together, my mother-in-law was incredibly kind. She would bring me cream puffs from my favorite bakery and insisted on taking care of most household chores. Reasoning that I was working, she handled all the cooking, but I struggled with the taste. It seemed her dishes were always too intense for my palate. I later learned she hailed from the southern part of the country, where people supposedly prefer salty foods. However, not everyone from the South shares this taste preference. Some of my Southern co-workers actually preferred milder flavors. Regardless, my mother-in-law's cooking went beyond salty. Her stews were so dark, I couldn't discern the ingredients, and they tasted like concentrated barbecue sauce. She would insist I have more, claiming it complemented bread well. When I voiced my struggle with the saltiness, Chris would ask if she had toned it down, to which she would reply with uncertainty, adjusting the seasoning based on my feedback. It left me feeling uneasy. We carried on like this for a while, but my work started to suffer. Constantly eating my mother-in-law's meals seemed to numb my taste buds, making it hard for me to discern flavors. Thankfully, the head chef always checked my dishes before service, sparing me any reprimands. Realizing this couldn't continue, I began waking up earlier than my mother-in-law, especially for breakfast, which seemed to alleviate some of my struggles at work. Oddly, her demeanor toward me grew colder. She started ignoring my greetings and even criticized my cooking. "Emily, this lacks flavor. You need to season it properly. Just because you're busy, what's your excuse?" "But mother-in-law, I've seasoned it as per the recipe. Please taste it." She did, only to respond, "It's still bland. Can't you tell?" Adding more would be unhealthy. What's wrong with enjoying good food? Don't let your skills go to waste. With that, she poured an excessive amount of soy sauce over my dish. "I'm concerned about our health." I protested, but she brushed it off. I had a hunch about what triggered my mother-in-law's sudden change in behavior. It stemmed from an incident at my niece's birthday party hosted at our home. My husband has 2 sisters, both married and living separately. Despite our limited interactions, they've always been kind, even offering to intervene if I faced any issues with my mother-in-law. Their husbands are also pleasant individuals. During the party, which celebrated my older sister-in-law's daughter turning 5, I assisted my mother-in-law in the kitchen. The dining table boasted an array of dishes, each clearly labeled with its creator. As the festivities commenced, my sister-in-law remarked, "Our daughter adores the omelette rice from Emily's restaurant. Having it here today is a treat." "I actually make the omelettes at work," I responded, prompting praise from the birthday girl herself. "The omelette lady's food is yummy." These exchanges didn't sit well with my mother-in-law. Desperate to redirect attention, she insisted, "Look, Grandma's stew is also tasty." But her granddaughter rejected it, complaining, "It hurts my mouth." While my sister's husbands politely sampled her cooking, it quickly requested more water, noting the excessive saltiness. My sister-in-law jokingly suggested I give her cooking lessons, which only fueled my mother-in-law's anger. She stormed out of the room, refusing to return. I regretted agreeing to cook for the party, but my mother-in-law had requested it, leaving me no choice. The tense atmosphere led to an early end to the celebration. While my sister-in-law's comment was meant in jest, criticism of one's cooking stings. It likely hurt my mother-in-law, who had prepared the food with hopes of delighting everyone. That night, I apologized to her, acknowledging any overstepping. Her response was cold. "Don't get too comfortable. You're just a freeloader." The next morning marked the beginning of relentless bullying from my mother-in-law. She would season the breakfast I prepared without even tasting it. If it didn't meet her standards, she disposed of it in front of me. Seeking solace, I turned to my husband, Chris. His response was dismissive, suggesting I was overreacting and should have obeyed his mother. He also started coming home later, using work as an excuse, even skipping his niece's birthday party. This behavior shattered any illusions I had about the kind of man he was, despite us being married for only 6 months. Our marriage was crumbling, and the thought of divorce crossed my mind. However, with just 6 months of marriage under our belt, I hesitated, knowing it would upset our parents. Then things took a turn for the worse. My mother-in-law slipped on the stairs, injuring her leg. Despite offers from my sister-in-law to assist, my mother-in-law insisted on my help, stating, "You're technically the wife, so you should at least do this much. It's absurd to rely on my daughter." From then on, I was at my mother-in-law's beck and call, even for trivial tasks. She began contacting me during work hours, forcing me to request time off repeatedly. Although my co-workers assured me it was fine, I felt guilty and eventually resigned from my job. It seemed my mother-in-law had been waiting for this moment, mocking me. "Can't handle your prestigious job anymore, can you?" How pathetic! Suddenly, day and night, my mother-in-law summoned me incessantly, leaving me no time to rest. Whenever I attempted to discuss things with Chris, he was increasingly absent, claiming to sleep at his office, though I doubted his words. My decision was made, but I couldn't leave without making a move, so I resolved to seek revenge. During breakfast one morning, I broached the topic. I want a divorce. They both looked shocked, dismissing my request with scorn. "What nonsense! We've barely been married a year. You'll be the laughingstock. Accusing me of infidelity? Absurd. You're embarrassing us, Emily. You're way out of line." Despite their mockery, I stood firm. Chris is always absent. My mother-in-law only knows how to bully. Who'd want to endure that? I'm filing for divorce. My decision stands. My resolute stance alarmed them, prompting Chris to stutter an apology. "We're sorry. I'll try to come home earlier. You can even stay at your parents' for a while." "But my mom's injured and I have work. Can't you stay until she recovers?" Though he struggled to apologize, his sincerity was evident. "I've been immature. I'm sorry. Can't you reconsider?" I reluctantly agreed, yet their smirks betrayed their true feelings, typical of a mother and son. Following that, the bullying ceased, and Chris began returning home earlier. However, the tranquility was short-lived. Chris resumed his late returns, and my mother-in-law's mistreatment resumed. Despite her leg failing to heal, she frequently ventured out, citing hospital visits. This behavior struck me as odd, leading me to uncover a shocking truth. Days later, my phone buzzed incessantly with calls from Chris and my mother-in-law. Chris's tone was heated when I answered. "Where are you? How can you leave my mom like this?" Unfazed, I responded, "I'm at my parents' house." "What's wrong?" "You said I could go. What are you saying? My mom's leg isn't better, right?" In the background, I heard my mother-in-law causing a commotion. "Regardless, I won't return. Please communicate through a lawyer," I declared before hanging up. Following that ordeal, I relished the peaceful moments at my parents' home. They pampered me with my favorite meals, and I reciprocated by cooking for them. When my mother praised my cooking as the best, tears welled up in my eyes. A few days later, I received an unexpected call from my dreaded mother-in-law. She apologized for her past behavior and extended an invitation to her upcoming birthday party, insisting I attend. The celebration would take place at a chic restaurant near the station, renowned for its new French-trained chef and authentic cuisine. Though not obligated, I saw it as an opportunity and accepted eagerly. My mother-in-law was thrilled, emphasizing the importance of my presence and promptly sharing the details. On the day of the birthday party the following week, Chris and my mother-in-law awaited me at the restaurant entrance. As I approached, Chris wore a smirk, and my heart sank. The gathering mirrored the previous one. 2 sets of sister-in-laws with their husbands and a little girl, alongside my mother-in-law, husband, and myself, totaling 8. The impending divorce remained a secret, with instructions to disclose it after the meal. Amidst the anticipation, the sister-in-laws and their spouses arrived. "Emily, it's been too long. You look stunning as always," they greeted warmly. With everyone present, we proceeded into the restaurant. However, our party of 8 seemed to puzzle the waiter. "Is the reservation for 7 people?" "We're 8, he questioned. Before I could respond, my mother-in-law interjected loudly, "The reservation is indeed for 7. We prefer this person to be seated separately, please," pointing at me as she spoke. As I was pushed forward, confusion painted the faces of the sister-in-laws and their husbands, while Chris and my mother-in-law exchanged smirks. "Ha, so this was their plan. How amusing. Emily has a surprise, doesn't she?" my mother-in-law declared, revealing the supposed surprise at her own birthday party, much to my bewilderment. Well, if my mother-in-law enjoys surprises, then I'll gladly provide one. "Emily, is it true?" The sisters-in-law appeared concerned, prompting my response, "Yes, indeed." I had hoped to keep it under wraps, but my mother-in-law caught wind of it. "Pardon me, is there an available seat?" I inquired of the waiter, who kindly led me to a seat out of sight from my in-laws, a welcome relief. While they enjoyed their meal, including a specially prepared kids' meal for one of the sisters-in-law's daughters, I remained out of their view. The atmosphere seemed pleasant. The young girl exclaimed joyfully, "Wow! This tastes just like my sister's omelet." Her sisters echoed similar sentiments, praising the food's deliciousness. My mother-in-law beamed with pride, boasting, "You see? Since the chef changed, the flavors have vastly improved. Wait until you try the meat dishes after this," she boasted, with my husband nodding in agreement. Then came the moment my mother-in-law had eagerly awaited, the arrival of the meat dish she had boasted about. A tantalizing plate was placed in front of my sister-in-law and her husband. However, as minutes passed, no food arrived for my mother-in-law and husband. Growing impatient, they beckoned the waiter, demanding answers. "What's the holdup?" My mother-in-law's voice boomed, the loudness seeming out of place in the elegant restaurant, prompting grimaces from nearby patrons. "The chef himself will serve your dishes. Please be patient," the waiter calmly responded, to which my mother-in-law retorted, "Oh, really? Is it because we're regulars?" Despite her tone, she didn't appear entirely displeased. "Apologies for the delay," they muttered, clearly expecting a waiter, but were met with shock when they saw who brought their dishes. Their eyes widened in disbelief as they gazed upon me, donning a chef's coat. "What? Emily, what's going on?" "Ah, so this is what a surprise feels like. Emily, you never fail to surprise us." Despite the sisters-in-law's amazement, my husband and mother-in-law wore expressions that clearly said, "This isn't what we had planned." Ignoring their reactions, I proceeded to serve the dishes without a care in the world. "I've prepared this dish especially tailored to your tastes," I announced as I placed a peculiar black lump smothered in rich soy sauce in front of my mother-in-law. With a flourish, I poured even more soy sauce onto it. She stood frozen, clearly taken aback. And for our special guest, I continued, presenting a plate adorned with an assortment of batteries, ranging from AA to D. To add an extra kick, "Please help yourself to some soy sauce," I added, setting a whole bottle in front of my husband. "After all, he's always buzzing about work," I quipped, arranging the batteries for my electrician husband, even selecting the priciest ones available at other electronic stores. I anticipate some gratitude for my efforts. My nieces erupted into laughter at the sight. My sister-in-law and her husband wore expressions suggesting, "Isn't this a bit over the top?" Meanwhile, my mother-in-law and husband flushed red with embarrassment, bellowing, "You're making a mockery of us and this establishment. Get the manager." As my husband made the demand, the manager emerged, calmly stating, "That would be me." "What on earth were you thinking? We're the customers here. We'll take legal action," they threatened, to which the manager calmly responded, "Is that so? Well, in that case, we'll be pursuing legal action against you two for disrupting our business." Their response? A puzzled huh? It became apparent that my in-laws were frequent patrons of the restaurant, often exhibiting arrogance towards the staff. They had a reputation for nitpicking, never considering the inconvenience they caused other customers. Their troublesome behavior was well known. "We've tolerated it because you're family, but it seems it's time to put some distance between us. Right, Emily?" "Absolutely, big brother." Upon hearing this revelation, my in-laws turned their surprised gazes towards us. "You see, this restaurant has been managed by my brother for quite some time now. He resides in France and couldn't make it back for our wedding due to his busy schedule." Despite sending his congratulations, my mother-in-law and my husband, Bob, had never met him. However, my brother had seen family photos and recognized both of them, I explained. "I deeply regret not being able to attend your wedding. I attempted to reach out several times, but you always seemed to have company," I continued, watching as their faces paled. The conversation grew tense. My sisters-in-law urged their husbands to leave first, then proposed, "Shall we delve into this further?" Though they smiled, their eyes betrayed a seriousness that sent a chill down my spine. "It's merely business, you know. The old-timers on Main Street, they prefer these modern spots these days," Chris interjected. As he spoke, a waiter approached and handed him an earring, remarking, "You left this behind last time. Dining with men who wear earrings, quite suspicious, isn't it?" My sister-in-law commented with a smirk. Unable to contain my laughter, I responded, "No, dear sister-in-law, this man has been having an affair with a woman who works at a florist near his shop." Chris's face drained of color as he glanced at me, silently questioning how I knew. Little did he know, I had hired a private investigator some time ago. My intuition had proven correct. Chris had been meeting the woman almost daily after work. This restaurant appeared to be their favorite haunt, as they visited nearly every week. The evidence, including photos of their rendezvous at a hotel, was abundant. "I'm serious about her. Marrying you was a mistake. I'm ready for a divorce," Chris declared, his stance on divorce suddenly shifting. "That works for me. I've been wanting a divorce too," I replied, seizing the opportunity. "But I'll be seeking alimony, so be prepared to pay up." "I just landed a major contract," I added. "I'll happily comply," he chuckled. "Good to hear. Now, as for you, mother-in-law." My mother-in-law, who had remained silent until then, visibly trembled. Though not as frequent a patron as Chris, she too had her own routine here. "But I'm already a widow," she protested. "That's irrelevant," I countered. Upon hearing her confession, I felt compelled to reveal another piece of information. "I had the private investigator look into you as well, mother-in-law. It seems your relationship with your partner has been ongoing for about 5 years. However, didn't father-in-law pass away just last year?" My sisters-in-law shot their mother a glare of anger. No surprises there. The two of them were always closer to our esteemed father than to our mother. Discovering the truth, they were understandably furious. I too was taken aback by the level of detail the investigator had uncovered about my mother-in-law. It was revealed that my father-in-law had also hired the same investigator. "You've been deceiving us about Dad all this time. And Chris, you're cheating on Emily. Have you both lost your minds?" The sisters-in-law's anger showed no signs of abating. Recognizing that our presence was disturbing other patrons, we agreed to disperse for the day and reconvene at the in-laws' house on another occasion. On that day, I bid farewell to
My cruel stepmother killed my mother, and now she wants to take over my father's $200 million business. When I exposed her, she was filled with rage. She grabbed me angrily and hurled me off the balcony, yelling, "Your game is over." I fell into the garden below, sustaining a few injuries, but I was safe. I resolved to take revenge. The very next day, when she woke up, she was met with a shocking surprise that changed everything. My name is Emma Spencer. I'm 22 years old, and for most of my life, I thought I had everything I could ever want. I grew up in a beautiful brownstone house in an upscale New York City neighborhood with my father, Richard Spencer. He's not just my dad, he's my hero. He built his $200 million business empire from the ground up, and watching him work so hard always inspired me. For years, it was just the two of us. My mother, Sophia Spencer, passed away when I was 10. Her death was devastating, but Dad and I leaned on each other to get through it. We had a bond that felt unbreakable. Then Rachel came into our lives. Rachel Spencer, my stepmother, is everything you'd expect a socialite to be: glamorous, charming, and seemingly perfect. Dad met her at a charity gala a few years ago, and she swept him off his feet. At first, I was happy for him. He deserved to find love again, and Rachel seemed so kind and supportive. She even tried to bond with me, buying me gifts and asking about my life. But there was always something about her that didn't feel genuine. Looking back, the signs were there from the beginning, but I ignored them. Maybe I didn't want to seem like the jealous stepdaughter. Maybe I didn't want to upset my dad. Either way, I convinced myself that Rachel was just trying to find her place in our family. For a while, life seemed normal, happy even. Rachel became deeply involved in my dad's business. She had a knack for making him feel like she cared about his work, his dreams, and his legacy. She encouraged him to expand his investments, to take bigger risks. Dad trusted her completely. But then things started to change. It began with little things. Rachel would make subtle comments about me to my dad, planting seeds of doubt. She'd say I was acting ungrateful or that I didn't appreciate everything he'd done for me. I shrugged it off at first, thinking she was just trying to be a concerned stepmother. But those comments started to add up, and I noticed Dad looking at me differently, questioning me in ways he never had before. Around the same time, I started noticing how involved Rachel was in my dad's finances. She had access to accounts, she knew the ins and outs of his deals, and she often suggested new ventures that seemed unnecessarily risky. I didn't think much of it until I overheard a conversation between Rachel and someone on the phone. She was speaking in hushed tones, talking about transfers and liquidations. Her tone was cold and calculating, not at all like the woman she pretended to be around my dad. I told myself I was overthinking it, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. That feeling only grew stronger when I accidentally found an email on Rachel's laptop. It was from Martin Caldwell, my dad's business rival. He's infamous in the corporate world for using underhanded tactics to destroy his competition. The email was brief, but clear. They were working together. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Rachel, my dad's wife, was helping his biggest enemy. I didn't know what to do. How could I confront her without proof? And even if I did, would Dad believe me? Rachel had already been sowing seeds of doubt about me. If I went to him with just suspicions, she'd twist it to make me look paranoid or jealous. So I decided to dig deeper. I started watching Rachel more closely, looking for anything that could explain what she was doing. That's when I realized how dangerous she really was. One day, while Rachel was out, I searched her room. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't care. I had to know the truth. What I found chilled me to my core: financial documents, secret bank accounts, and emails between Rachel and Martin. They were planning to transfer $200 million of my dad's assets into accounts they controlled. They were going to bankrupt him and leave the country. But it didn't stop there. As I read through more of the emails, I discovered something even darker. Rachel had been involved in my mother's death. My mom's passing had always been explained as a tragic accident, but the emails suggested Rachel had orchestrated it. She wanted my dad and his money all along. I couldn't breathe. The woman I had tried so hard to accept into my family was a monster. She was manipulating my dad, planning to destroy him, and she had already taken my mom from me. I knew I had to do something, but I had no idea where to start. I tried talking to my dad, but it didn't go well. Emma, this is ridiculous, he said when I told him Rachel was hiding something. She loves us. Why would she do anything to hurt this family? I wanted to scream, but I held it together. I realized then that Rachel had done more than manipulate my dad's business. She had manipulated his heart. He couldn't see her for who she really was. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. But I also felt something else. Determination. Rachel might have fooled my dad, but she wasn't going to fool me. I would find a way to stop her, no matter what it took. What I didn't know was how far Rachel would go to protect her secrets, and how dangerous she could really be. After that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rachel's face and thought about the emails I had read. The realization that she was planning to ruin my father and had a hand in my mother's death haunted me. I had to act, but I couldn't do it recklessly. Rachel had already managed to turn my dad against me in subtle ways. If I made one wrong move, she would twist it to her advantage. I started by keeping a low profile. Rachel was sharp, and if she noticed me acting differently, she'd know I was onto her. I pretended everything was normal. I greeted her in the mornings, had polite conversations over dinner, and even smiled when she asked about my studies. It was exhausting, but I knew I needed time to gather solid proof. To do that, I began digging into Rachel's life. I checked her laptop whenever she left it unattended, copied files onto a USB drive, and even took photos of the documents I found in her closet. The more I uncovered, the more horrifying the picture became. Rachel had been planning this for years. She'd ingratiated herself into my father's life, gained his trust, and slowly taken control of his finances. She and Martin Caldwell were working together to siphon off the $200 million my father had built over decades. It wasn't just business, though. Rachel had personal motives, too. In one particularly damning email to Martin, she wrote, "Once we finish this, Richard will have nothing left to cling to, just me. He won't even look at that little brat of a daughter." My stomach churned as I read her words. She didn't just want to steal from my dad. She wanted to destroy our family. But the worst discovery came one evening when I found an old folder hidden in Rachel's closet. Inside were records of a life insurance policy for my mother, Sophia Spencer, and details about the car accident that had killed her. There were notes scribbled in Rachel's handwriting about the timing of the accident, as well as a payment made to someone I didn't recognize. My mom's death had always felt sudden and senseless, but now I knew it wasn't an accident. Rachel had orchestrated it to get my dad and his fortune. I felt sick. Betrayal doesn't even begin to describe what I felt. The woman I had trusted, who had acted like she cared about our family, was a murderer. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to scream at her, to tell my dad everything. But I knew better. She was too good at manipulating him, and I didn't have enough evidence to make him believe me yet. The only person I could trust was myself. Over the next few weeks, I built my case. I gathered emails, bank records, and anything else that connected Rachel to her crimes. I even started recording our conversations when she let her guard down. It wasn't easy. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. Rachel seemed to sense that I was up to something. She started asking more questions, watching me more closely, and making subtle comments to undermine me. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Emma," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you've been so quiet lately. Is everything okay?" Of course, I lied, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "Just busy with school?" Her smile widened, but her eyes stayed cold. "Good. I'd hate to think you were distracted by anything. It's important to focus on the things that matter." I nodded, my heart pounding. Rachel might have been suspicious, but she didn't know exactly what I was doing. Not yet. Things came to a head one night when I overheard Rachel and Martin on a video call. I was coming downstairs to get some water when I heard their voices from the study. The door was slightly ajar and I froze, listening. "Everything's on track," Rachel was saying. "The transfers will be finalized next week. Once it's done, Richard will be wiped out." "And the girls?" Martin asked. His voice was cold and calculating. "She's a nuisance," Rachel said. But she won't be a problem for much longer. I didn't wait to hear more. I bolted back upstairs, my mind racing. Rachel was planning something. I didn't know what, but I could feel the danger closing in. That night, as I lay in bed, I tried to think of my next move. I needed to warn my dad, but I couldn't go to him without undeniable proof. Rachel was too good at twisting the truth. I decided to wait a few more days to gather just a little more evidence before confronting him. But Rachel didn't give me the chance. The next night, she came into my room. I was sitting on my bed, scrolling through my phone, when she walked in without knocking. She looked furious. "You've been snooping, haven't you?" she demanded, her voice low and venomous. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to stay calm. "Don't play dumb, Emma," she snapped. "I know you've been poking around where you don't belong." I stood up, my heart racing. "What are you so afraid of, Rachel? That I'll tell Dad the truth? That he'll see you for who you really are?" Her face twisted with rage. "You think you're so clever, don't you? But you don't understand what you're dealing with." Before I could respond, she lunged at me. I stumbled back, and before I knew it, she pushed me toward the open balcony door. I tried to grab onto something, but it was too late. I fell. I don't remember hitting the ground. When I woke up, I was lying in the garden, dazed and in pain. But somehow, miraculously, I was alive. Rachel must have thought I was dead, because she wasn't there when I opened my eyes. As I lay there, one thought burned in my mind. I had to stop her, no matter what it took. When I woke up in the garden, my entire body ached. My head was spinning, and my heart pounded as the reality of what had just happened hit me. Rachel had tried to kill me. She didn't just want to scare me off or silence me. She wanted me gone for good. But she had failed. I was alive, and now, nothing could stop me from exposing her. I managed to drag myself back inside, careful not to make a sound. I couldn't let Rachel know I had survived. I limped to my room, locked the door, and sat on the floor, trembling. My injuries weren't severe, cuts, bruises, and soreness from the fall, but my mind was racing. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Rachel wasn't just a liar and a thief. She was a murderer. I had to act fast, but I had to be smart about it. The next morning, I pretended nothing had happened. I stayed in my room most of the day, claiming I wasn't feeling well. Rachel didn't come to check on me, which told me she believed I had fallen accidentally, or worse, that she thought I wouldn't dare say anything. It was a small advantage, but I intended to use it. I spent the day going through the evidence I had collected. Emails, bank records, and notes. All of it painted a damning picture of Rachel and her scheme with Martin Caldwell. I also found a voice memo on my phone from the night I overheard their conversation in the study. It was shaky, but it captured Rachel's words, "Richard will be wiped out." It wasn't just my proof, it was my lifeline. But I knew evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed to make sure Rachel couldn't manipulate my dad once I confronted her. I needed witnesses. That's when I got the idea to use the upcoming charity gala. It was the perfect opportunity. My dad's business associates, family friends, and even the media would be there. Rachel wouldn't be able to weasel her way out of it if I exposed her in front of everyone. In the days leading up to the gala, I stayed out of Rachel's way, pretending to be the obedient and oblivious stepdaughter she wanted me to be. Every interaction with her was a performance. She smiled at me like nothing had happened, her eyes gleaming with false warmth. But I saw through her act now. I could feel her watching me, trying to gauge whether I suspected anything. Little did she know, I had already planned her downfall. On the day of the gala, I prepared everything. I organized the evidence into a presentation and brought copies of key documents on a flash drive. I even rehearsed what I was going to say. It had to be clear and undeniable, leaving no room for Rachel to twist the narrative. This was my chance to expose her, to save my dad, and to finally get justice for my mom. When the evening arrived, I dressed in my best and walked into the grand ballroom with my head held high. Rachel was already there, charming the guests as usual. She didn't even glance at me. She was too busy playing the perfect hostess. My dad, oblivious as ever, stood beside her, proud and unaware of the storm about to hit. I felt a pang of sadness for him. He had no idea what Rachel had done, what she was capable of. But he would soon. As the evening wore on, I waited for the perfect moment. The room was filled with influential people, business partners, journalists, and friends of the family. I walked up to the stage, my heart pounding. Gripping the microphone tightly, I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something important I need to share." The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. My dad looked confused, but Rachel's face froze. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. "This isn't easy for me to say," I began, my voice trembling but steady. "But there's something you all need to know about Rachel Spencer." The truth was about to come out, and there was no turning back. As I stood on the stage, every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on me. My hands trembled, but I tightened my grip on the microphone. This was it, the moment I'd been working toward. I glanced at Rachel, whose smile had vanished. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out, but there wasn't one. "My stepmother, Rachel Spencer," I began, "has been hiding something terrible from all of us. Tonight, I'm here to tell you the truth." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but I pressed on. I didn't have time to let fear take over. I needed to say everything. Rachel has been working with Martin Caldwell, my father's biggest business rival. Together, they've been plotting to steal $200 million from my father's company, dismantling everything he's worked for. Gasps echoed through the room. My dad stood frozen, his face pale with confusion and disbelief. "Emma, what are you talking about?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I have proof," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. I pulled out a flash drive from my purse and handed it to the event's AV technician. "Please show everyone the files." The technician hesitated, but I nodded, and the presentation began to play on the large screen behind me. Emails between Rachel and Martin flashed on the screen, detailing their plan to siphon my dad's assets into offshore accounts. Financial records showed suspicious transfers linked to Rachel. The final slide was the recording of Rachel's voice saying, "Once it's done, Richard will be wiped out." The room was dead silent. I turned back to the audience. This isn't just about money. Rachel has gone further than any of us could imagine. She's not only betrayed my father, but also had a hand in the death of my mother, Sophia Spencer. Her death wasn't an accident, it was planned. Another wave of shocked whispers spread through the crowd. My dad staggered back a step, his face contorted with disbelief. "Emma, is this true?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I didn't have to answer. Rachel's reaction said it all. She lunged toward me, her voice sharp and venomous. "You don't know what you're talking about, you little brat. You're making this up." But before she could reach me, 2 uniformed police officers stepped forward. I had contacted them earlier and shared the evidence. They had been waiting in the wings for this exact moment. "Rachel Spencer," one officer said, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, embezzlement, and attempted murder." Rachel's face crumpled. "Richard, you can't believe this," she cried, turning to my dad. "You know I'd never hurt you." "She's lying." But my dad didn't move. His face was a mixture of pain and anger as he stared at her, realizing the truth. "How could you?" he whispered, his voice heavy with betrayal. "How could you do this to me, to Emma?" As the officers led Rachel away, the room erupted into a frenzy of murmurs and gasps. I stood there, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. It was over. The lies, the manipulation, the fear, it was all over. In the days that followed, Rachel's accomplice, Martin Caldwell, was also arrested. The stolen assets were recovered, and my dad's company was saved. But the damage Rachel had done to our family wasn't so easily repaired. My dad and I had a lot to work through. He was devastated by the role he'd played in letting Rachel into our lives and for doubting me when I tried to warn him. "I'm so sorry, Emma," he told me one evening as we sat in the living room. "I should have believed you. I let her blind me to the truth." "It's not your fault," I said, though part of me was still hurt. "She fooled both of us. But we're still here. We can rebuild together." And we did. Slowly, we began to heal. My dad focused on making his business stronger than ever, while I returned to college with a newfound sense of purpose. Rachel's betrayal had scarred us, but it also reminded me of the importance of resilience, truth, and justice. The wound she left behind will never fully disappear, but as my dad and I look forward, I know one thing for sure. We're stronger now. Together, we're rebuilding not just our family but our trust, determined to protect what truly matters. This was our story, a story of betrayal, greed, and redemption. A story of truth winning over lies. And a story of resilience in the face of darkness. Clara sighed as she folded the last of the laundry in their tiny apartment. It had been a long day at school, and all she wanted was a quiet evening. As she reached for Mark's jacket to toss it in the wash, her hand froze. A crumpled envelope peeked out of the pocket. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she pulled it out, smoothing the creases. Her heart sank. Eviction notice. The bold red text at the top felt like a slap in the face. The letter detailed that they were 3 months behind on rent. How could this be? She had trusted Mark to handle the bills while she managed their household. Mark, she called, her voice trembling, but it wasn't anger, it was fear. Mark appeared in the doorway, his easy smile fading the moment he saw her holding the notice. "What's this?" Clara demanded, her voice unsteady. Mark hesitated, his hand rubbing the back of his neck, a telltale sign that he was nervous. "I can explain," he began, but Clara interrupted him. "Explain what? That we're about to lose our home? That you've been hiding this from me for months?" Mark stepped closer, trying to take the notice from her hands. "Clara, listen. It's not what you think. I had to help Sophia. She needed money for the kids' school fees, and then the car broke down." Clara's eyes widened. "You gave our rent money to your sisters?" "She's been struggling since her husband passed," Mark said defensively. "I couldn't just let her go under." Clara's anger bubbled to the surface. "So instead, you decided to let us go under?" She waved the notice in his face. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Or were you planning to wait until we were out on the street?" Mark reached for her hands, but Clara pulled away. "I was going to fix it," he said, his voice quieter now. "I've been working extra hours. I thought I could catch up before it got this far." "Fix it," Clara repeated, her voice rising. "With what money, Mark? Because our savings are gone, aren't they?" Mark's silence was all the confirmation she needed. Clara turned away, her mind racing. Their home, the life they had built together. It all felt like a lie. And for what? So Sophia could keep up appearances? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Sophia herself. "Can't wait for family dinner tomorrow. Love you both." The irony made Clara laugh bitterly. Sophia, who was apparently struggling, had time to plan dinners while they faced eviction. "I can fix this," Mark said again, his voice pleading now. "I just need more time." Clara stared at him. The man she had married 5 years ago, now a stranger. "You've made your choice, Mark," she said, her voice cold. "And it wasn't me." As Mark stood frozen in the doorway, Clara turned back to the laundry. She had no idea how they would get through this, but one thing was clear. Trust between them had been shattered. The next morning, Clara woke up early. Sleep had been elusive, her mind replaying the events of the previous night. The eviction notice sat on the kitchen counter, glaring at her like a bad omen. She stared at it as she sipped her coffee, her thoughts in turmoil. How had they reached this point? Had she been so blind to Mark's actions, so trusting that she didn't notice the warning signs? Mark was still asleep, or at least pretending to be. Clara didn't care. She needed space. Grabbing her bag, she left the apartment, letting the door slam behind her. Her destination was clear. She needed to talk to Tina. Tina's office was in a bustling part of downtown Portland. Clara had barely texted her friend a summary of the situation before Tina called back, her tone sharp and concerned. "Get here now," she had said. When Clara arrived, Tina was waiting outside, leaning against the building with 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. "This better be a joke," Tina said, handing one to Clara as they started walking. "I wish it was," Clara muttered. She explained everything as they strolled along the park path nearby. The eviction notice, the drained savings, Mark's excuses, and Sophia's constant demands. Tina listened silently, her expression darkening with each word. When Clara finished, Tina stopped walking and faced her. "You're telling me Mark gave your savings to his sister, without telling you, while you're working yourself to the bone to keep things afloat?" "Yes," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Saying it out loud made the betrayal cut even deeper. Tina sighed, shaking her head. "This isn't just a bad decision, Clara. It's a betrayal. He didn't even give you a chance to weigh in. He just took from you." Clara felt her throat tighten. "I keep asking myself why he didn't trust me enough to tell me. I could have helped figure something out." "Because he didn't want to hear no," Tina said bluntly. "It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission, especially when he's trying to please Sophia." The mention of Sophia made Clara's blood boil. "She's been living with us for months, Tina. Months. I thought she was trying to get back on her feet, but now it feels like she's just using us." "And Mark's letting her," Tina said. "You need to figure out where your line is, Clara. What's the limit before you've had enough?" Clara didn't answer. She wasn't sure where her limit was yet, but she knew she was close. That evening, Clara returned home to find Sophia sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. The television blared a reality show in the background, and the faint smell of popcorn lingered in the air. Her two young kids were running around the small living room, leaving toys scattered everywhere. "Clara," Sophia said brightly, as if nothing was wrong. "Dinner's almost ready. Hope you don't mind. I used that fancy pasta you bought last week." The kids were craving something special. Clara clenched her jaw. Fancy pasta? The same pasta she and Mark had decided to save for a rare date night? She forced a smile. "No problem," she said, her voice tight. As Sophia turned back to her phone, Clara stepped into the kitchen. Mark was there, stirring a pot on the stove. He looked up when she walked in, guilt written all over his face. "Clara, he started, but she cut him off. "Not now," she said sharply. She didn't have the energy for another argument. Instead, she grabbed a glass of water and walked out, ignoring the tension hanging in the air. The next day, Clara sat in her classroom during her lunch break, staring at her phone. A notification had popped up from Sophia's Instagram account. Against her better judgment, she opened it. The post was a picture of Sophia's kids in brand new outfits, holding shopping bags from an upscale mall. The caption read, "Fresh start, new beginnings." So blessed. Clara's stomach turned. How could Sophia be flaunting expensive purchases while they were on the verge of eviction? She felt her frustration bubble over and texted Tina immediately.
"Wine.
My place.
Tonight."
Tina arrived later with 2 bottles of red, her expression grim as Clara explained the latest outrage. "She's using Instagram to brag about her life while draining ours. And Mark, he just stands by and lets her." "Then stop letting him," Tina said firmly, pouring Clara a generous glass. "You don't owe them anything, Clara. If they're going to treat you like a doormat, it's time to show them the door." Clara stared at the wine swirling in her glass. Tina was right, but it wasn't that simple. She had loved Mark, trusted him. Letting go of their life together wasn't something she could do lightly. The family dinner the following evening was everything Clara expected, and worse. Linda arrived early with a casserole dish in hand and immediately began organizing the table as if it were her home. Mark hovered near her, hanging on her every word. Sophia played the grieving widow, her kids the center of attention as usual. Clara sat silently through most of it, her appetite gone. She listened as Linda praised Mark for being such a good brother and scolded Clara for not being more understanding of family struggles. Finally, Clara had enough. She set her fork down with a sharp clink and looked directly at Sophia. "Do you want to tell everyone the truth, or should I?" The room went still. Sophia blinked, feigning innocence. "What do you mean?" "I mean the truth about where the money really went. The shopping, the trips, the expensive meals," Clara said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering underneath. "The money Mark took from me to give to you?" Linda gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Mark looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Sophia's face hardened. I don't know what you're talking about. Clara pulled her phone from her pocket and opened the screenshots she had taken of Sophia's Instagram posts. She slid the phone across the table. Don't you? Because this doesn't look like someone who's struggling. Sophia glanced at the screen, her face pale. I was going to pay it back, she stammered.
When?
After we were homeless? Clara demanded. You've been lying to us this whole time, Sophia. Using your kids as an excuse to live off of us while we fall apart. Linda tried to interject, but Clara held up a hand. No, Linda. You don't get to lecture me about family loyalty when your daughter has been stealing from me. The table fell into silence. Clara stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm done, she said, her voice firm. I won't let you drag me down with you. Without waiting for a response, she walked out, leaving them all to sit in the mess they had created. Back at the apartment, Clara began packing her things. She didn't know what her next step would be, but one thing was certain. She couldn't stay. As she folded clothes into a suitcase, Mark appeared in the doorway. Clara, he said, his voice heavy with emotion.
Please don't do this.
We can fix it. She looked at him. The man she had once loved so deeply, now a stranger to her. You made your choice, Mark, she said quietly. And it wasn't me. Mark's shoulders slumped as Clara zipped up her suitcase. The weight of his betrayal hung heavy between them, and Clara knew it was a weight she could no longer carry. Clara spent the next few days staying at Tina's apartment. The small guest room she was using didn't feel like home, but it was better than staying in the place that had become a battleground. Tina had been endlessly supportive, offering wine, advice, and the occasional distraction, but Clara knew she couldn't stay here forever. She needed to figure out her next move. One evening, as Clara sat scrolling through job listings on her laptop, Tina walked in with 2 cups of tea. Any luck? She asked, handing Clara a mug. Clara shook her head.
Not yet.
I'm not sure what I'm even looking for. It feels like my whole life has been uprooted. Tina sat down beside her. You know, uprooting isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's the only way to grow. Clara gave her a small smile. You should write greeting cards. Seriously, though, Tina continued, leaning forward. You're not the one who should feel displaced here. Mark and Sophia are the ones who messed up. If anyone needs to uproot their lives, it's them, not you. Clara sighed. I know, but it's hard to walk away from everything I've built. Tina put a hand on her shoulder. You're not walking away, Clara. You're rebuilding. And trust me, you're going to build something so much stronger this time. The next day, Clara received a text from Mark. It was brief and to the point. Can we talk? Just us. She stared at the message for a long moment, her emotions a mix of anger, sadness, and curiosity. Part of her wanted to ignore it, but another part, the part that still remembered the man she had married, wanted answers. After a deep breath, she typed back, fine. Tomorrow. At the park. The following afternoon, Clara arrived at the park early. She sat on a bench under a large oak tree, the chilly Portland air nipping at her cheeks. Mark arrived a few minutes later, looking tired and disheveled. His once neat appearance had given way to wrinkled clothes and a shadow of stubble on his face. Thanks for meeting me, he said as he sat down beside her. Clara didn't respond immediately. She stared at the playground in the distance, watching children laugh and play. Finally, she turned to him. What do you want, Mark? He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. I messed up, Clara. I know I did. I should have told you about the money, about the bills, about everything. I thought I could fix it on my own. By lying to me? Clara shot back, her voice sharp. By taking our savings without even asking? Mark flinched. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just trying to help Sophia. She's been through so much, losing her husband, raising 2 kids on her own. And what about me, Mark? Clara interrupted. What about us? Do you think this hasn't been hard for me too? I was your partner. You were supposed to trust me, but instead, you chose to betray me. I didn't see it that way, Mark said quietly. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing for who? Clara asked, her eyes narrowing. Because it sure wasn't for us. Mark looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping. You're right, he admitted. I let my guilt over Sophia's situation cloud my judgment. I put her needs above yours, above ours, and I'm sorry. Clara shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Sorry doesn't fix this, Mark. Sorry doesn't pay the rent or undo the damage you've done. I know, Mark said. But I want to make it right. I'm starting therapy. I've been talking to my boss about picking up extra work to pay back what I took. I'm trying, Clara. Clara stared at him, searching his face for the man she had once trusted implicitly. She could see the regret in his eyes, but regret wasn't enough. Trust, once broken, wasn't so easily repaired. I appreciate that you're trying, she said finally. But I don't know if I can forgive you for this. Mark nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting her response. I understand. But I'm not giving up on us, Clara. Not yet. Clara didn't reply. She wasn't sure what to say. Part of her wanted to believe him, to hold on to the hope that they could rebuild what had been lost. But another part, the part that had been betrayed, wasn't ready to let go of her anger. Later that evening, Clara returned to the apartment for the first time in days. Mark wasn't home, but Sophia was. She was sitting on the couch, her kids playing quietly on the floor. When Clara walked in, Sophia looked up, her expression a mix of guilt and defiance. Clara, she said hesitantly. Can we talk? Clara crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. What is there to talk about, Sophia? You've already said enough with your actions. Sophia stood, wringing her hands nervously. I know I've messed up. I know I've taken advantage of you and Mark, and I'm sorry. Are you? Clara asked, her voice cold. Because it didn't seem like you were sorry when you were posting pictures of your shopping trips and new clothes while we were struggling to keep a roof over our heads. Sophia winced. I was trying to keep up appearances. After Tom died, I didn't know how to handle everything. The bills, the kids, the loneliness, it all felt like too much. So I made bad choices. Bad choices that hurt other people, Clara said. Do you even realize the position you've put us in? I do now, Sophia said, her voice cracking. I've been selfish and I see that now. I want to make things right, Clara. I've already started looking for a job, and I've talked to Mark about moving out as soon as I can. Clara stared at her, unsure whether to believe her words. Sophia had always been good at playing the victim, but this time there was something different in her tone. Something genuine. We'll see, Clara said finally. Actions speak louder than words, Sophia. If you really want to make things right, show me. Sophia nodded, tears streaming down her face. I will. I promise. That night, Clara sat alone in the apartment, her mind racing. The confrontation with Sophia had left her feeling drained, but also strangely hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. But she knew better than to let her guard down. Promises were easy to make, but much harder to keep. As she stared out the window at the city lights, Clara realized that no matter what happened, she needed to prioritize herself for once. She couldn't keep sacrificing her happiness and stability for others. It was time to take control of her own life. With a renewed sense of determination, Clara picked up her phone and started making a plan. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let anyone else dictate her path ever again. Clara sat in the corner booth of a small coffee shop in downtown Portland, the same one she had visited countless times during her marriage to Mark. This time, though, the visit felt different. She had requested to meet him here, not to rekindle anything, but to finalize what had been left unresolved. Mark arrived a few minutes late, his shoulders slightly hunched and his expression weary. He spotted Clara and gave her a small, hesitant wave before approaching the table. Hey, he said, sitting down across from her. Clara nodded, folding her hands on the table.
Hey.
The silence between them was heavy. For a moment, Clara simply studied him. Mark looked thinner, older, as if the weight of everything had finally settled on him. It wasn't anger she felt toward him anymore, just a quiet sadness. I wanted to meet to talk about what happens next, she said finally, her voice calm but firm. It's time to make decisions. Mark nodded, his eyes dropping to his coffee cup. I get it. I've been thinking about it too. I've been staying at a motel for now, but I found a roommate situation that's more permanent. Clara raised her eyebrows. A roommate? Yeah, Mark said, his voice soft. I need to figure out who I am without everything else. Without Mom's influence. Without Sophia leaning on me. I've started therapy too. That's a good step, Clara said, surprised by his candor. Mark met her gaze for the first time. I know I can't undo what I've done, Clara. I just want you to know I'm sorry for everything. For breaking your trust, for not putting you first, for all of it. Clara nodded slowly. I appreciate that, Mark. But this isn't just about apologies. It's about actions. I need to move forward, and I can't do that if I'm tied to this mess. Mark looked away, his jaw tightening. Does that mean you're filing for divorce? Clara exhaled. She had thought long and hard about this. Yes, she said finally. It's what's best for both of us. We need to start over, separately. Mark nodded, his expression pained but accepting. I understand. I don't want to hold you back anymore. For the first time in months, Clara felt a small weight lift off her shoulders. The decision, though painful, felt right. A week later, Clara was back in the apartment, boxing up her belongings. Mark had already moved out, leaving her the space to pack in peace. Sophia and her kids had left, too, opting to stay with Linda temporarily. The quiet was both eerie and comforting. As she packed, Clara found an envelope tucked into one of the kitchen drawers. It was addressed to her, the handwriting unmistakably Sophia's. She opened it cautiously, expecting yet another apology. Instead, she found a check and a short note. Clara, I know this doesn't fix everything, but it's a start. I've been working and saving, and I'm going to pay back every cent I owe you. Thank you for being the one who forced me to wake up. You didn't have to, but you did. I'll never forget it. Sophia. Clara stared at the check, her emotions a mix of surprise and disbelief. It wasn't a large amount, but it was a step, a tangible effort to repair the damage. Months passed. Clara moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town, closer to her school. The space was modest but cozy, filled with sunlight and the hum of new beginnings. She began to focus on herself for the first time in years, rediscovering hobbies she had once loved, like painting and hiking. Tina remained her constant support, their friendship growing even stronger. One evening, as Clara sat on her balcony sketching the city skyline, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Tina. You're going to want to see this. Check Sophia's Instagram. Clara hesitated before opening the app. Sophia had been quiet on social media for months, but the latest post showed her kids at a park, smiling wide as they played. The caption read, starting fresh. New job, new outlook. Grateful for second chances. Clara stared at the screen, a small smile tugging at her lips. Maybe, just maybe, Sophia was turning things around. A year after everything had fallen apart, Clara found herself back at the same coffee shop, but this time for a different reason. She was meeting Tina to celebrate a milestone, her promotion to department head at her school. As Clara sipped her coffee, she thought about how far she had come. The pain of betrayal had lessened, replaced by a quiet strength. She no longer felt defined by the mistakes of others. Instead, she had rebuilt her life on her terms. Here's to starting over, Tina said, raising her mug in a toast. Clara clinked her mug against Tina's, a genuine smile on her face. Here's to growth. Outside the coffee shop, the city buzzed with life. Clara watched as people hurried past, each carrying their own stories of struggle and resilience. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. No longer burdened by the weight of betrayal, she was free to embrace the future, a future she had built with her own strength and determination. I inherited a $90 million mansion from my parents, but my greedy mother-in-law had other plans. She demanded I sell it for her business. When I refused, she showed up with her son, tied up the security guard, and set my home ablaze. They thought they'd won, but the next morning, I hit them with a shocking revenge they could never have imagined. My name is Lena Harrison, and if you'd asked me a year ago where I saw my life going, I would have told you everything was perfect. I was 32, a successful event planner in Austin, Texas. I had a job I loved, friends I cherished, and a marriage I believed in. My parents, both self-made millionaires, had given me everything I needed to build a secure future. And when they passed away unexpectedly, I thought I could continue honoring their legacy while building my own life. When I inherited their estate, which included a $90 million luxury mansion, I felt like I was living in a dream. It was more than just a home. It was the product of their hard work and sacrifice, a symbol of their love for me. I could still feel their presence in every corner of that house. It was overwhelming, yes, but it was also an opportunity to truly begin a new chapter in my life. My husband, Dylan, and I had always talked about moving into a bigger home one day, but nothing could have prepared us for the reality of what was about to unfold. Dylan was 34, a real estate agent who was thrilled about the prospect of living in such a luxurious mansion. When we moved in, it felt like our lives were finally coming together. We spent days decorating the grand rooms and evenings strolling through the lush gardens, savoring the peace of our new life. For a while, it felt like nothing could disrupt our happiness. But it didn't take long for the first cracks to appear. Dylan's mother, Margaret, was a woman who'd never hidden her opinions. At 58, she had always been a constant presence in our lives, critical, demanding, and often overbearing. I thought I'd be able to manage her, but I couldn't have been more wrong. From the moment Margaret learned about the mansion, something in her shifted. Her words were kind at first, full of praise, but there was an undercurrent of something darker. She began to make remarks about how lucky I was and how the house would be wasted on one person. At first, I didn't think much of it, but soon, the comments became more direct. "Lena, you know," she said one afternoon as she casually visited, sipping tea, "I've always believed in good investments. With all that money, you could really expand your reach. Real estate is such a profitable business. I don't know why you're holding on to that mansion." I was taken aback. I had just lost both my parents, and this house was all I had left to remind me of them. It wasn't just about money. It was about honoring their memory. "I'm not ready to sell, Margaret," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "This place means a lot to me." She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I get it, Lena. But you do realize that selling it and investing in something else would set you up for life, right? Think about it. Real estate, the right property, the right business. It could change everything." I could feel my stomach tighten, but I tried not to show it. "I'm not interested, Margaret. I'm happy here." But Margaret was persistent. Every time we spoke, the conversation veered back to the house. It was clear she didn't understand why I wouldn't simply sell it and use the money for something better. She grew more insistent, and that's when I started to feel the pressure. It wasn't just her anymore. Dylan, my husband, began to show signs of being influenced by his mother's ideas. He would sit quietly during our discussions, his silence growing louder with every passing day. I tried to brush it off at first, telling myself that it was just a phase. After all, Dylan had always been supportive. He had been my rock through all the struggles with my parents' passing. But as the days went on, I began to wonder if his loyalties were shifting. One day, Margaret and her younger son, Max, showed up at our door unannounced. I knew immediately something was wrong. Margaret's eyes were too bright, too focused, and Max, who was only 26, had an expression that mirrored his mother's, impatience and hidden anger. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Margaret didn't even greet me. She walked straight into the living room and, without preamble, said, "Lena, I've had enough of this. The house is a waste. You need to sell it and use that money wisely. I'm tired of waiting for you to make the right decision." I was stunned. "Margaret, this house is not for sale. This isn't about the money. It's about keeping my parents' legacy alive. I won't just give it up because you think it's a waste." She smiled coldly, and for the first time, I saw something dark in her eyes. "You think you're the only one who can benefit from this inheritance? You think your parents would want you to hoard it? No, Lena. It's time to let go. Before I could respond, Max stepped forward, looking at me with a coldness that sent a chill down my spine. Mom's right, he said. You're being stubborn. This could be a huge opportunity for all of us. Why hold on to something that just sits there, wasting away? I felt the walls closing in, the weight of their words crushing me. This isn't about money, I said again, my voice firm. I'm not selling. This house is mine, and it means something to me. Margaret's smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Fine, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. But don't think I'll forget this. And just like that, she and Max left, but I had a feeling in my gut that this wasn't the end. I didn't know it at the time, but I was about to learn the true depths of betrayal and the cost of standing my ground. What happened next would change everything. I wish I could say I was wrong about Margaret, that I overreacted. But what happened next confirmed all of my fears. I thought the worst was behind me, but in reality, it had only just begun. It was a regular afternoon, or at least I thought it was. Dylan and I were settling into our new life, still getting used to the mansion. I was upstairs working on some event plans, trying to keep busy. I didn't expect anything unusual, but then I heard a loud knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. Margaret rarely came by unless she had something to say, and her tone the last time we spoke made it clear that she was not going to let this go. I answered the door, only to find Margaret standing there, her face flushed with anger. She didn't say hello.
She didn't ask how I was.
She simply stormed past me, her eyes locked on the mansion as if she was ready to tear it down with her gaze alone. What are you doing here, Margaret? I asked, my voice growing tense. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she called out to Max, who had been hiding behind the large columns of the porch. Max stepped forward, and that's when I knew something was wrong. They weren't just here to talk. Margaret, what is this about? I asked again, feeling a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. Everything, Lena, she finally said, her voice hard. You've made a huge mistake by not listening to me. I gave you a chance, but now you're forcing my hand. Before I could ask what she meant, a loud sound came from behind me, followed by the unmistakable crackle of fire. I whipped around in shock and disbelief. Margaret and Max were standing there, a lighter in Max's hand, and the flames were starting to spread on the edge of the mansion's beautiful porch. My breath caught in my throat. What are you doing? I screamed. This is the only way, Lena, Margaret said coldly. You're not listening, so we'll make you. My heart pounded in my chest.
They were setting the house on fire.
Not just any fire, but an intentional one, meant to destroy everything that my parents had worked for, everything I had inherited. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do. My thoughts were racing as I watched the flames begin to spread, licking at the edges of the mansion, hungry and fast. My first instinct was to call for help, but I had to do something more. Something to stop them from completely ruining everything. I turned quickly, my mind snapping into survival mode. The mansion had security cameras and a guard who was usually stationed at the front gate. I ran to the living room and grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I started recording the scene. I knew I had to capture everything, especially since I could see Dylan standing in the background, his face a mask of indecision. As I panned the camera, I saw the security guard tied to a chair, his mouth gagged, unable to stop the arsonists. That was when the full weight of the betrayal hit me. My own husband, my partner, was standing there doing nothing. Dylan wasn't even trying to stop his mother or brother. He wasn't trying to protect the house. He was complicit. I could feel the tears threatening to spill, but I held them back. I wasn't going to let them see my weakness. I wasn't going to let them break me. In a flash, I made a decision. I ran to the back of the house and released my trained attack dogs. I knew they would be my only chance to force them to stop. The dogs were well trained to respond to threats, and I trusted them more than anyone else at that moment. As soon as Margaret and Max saw the dogs running toward them, their faces went pale with fear. Without a word, they both turned and bolted, running as fast as they could, leaving the fire to rage on in the background. It was surreal, almost as if it were all happening in slow motion. I heard the dogs barking loudly, chasing after them, but it was too late. The fire had already taken hold. I dialed 911, but by the time help arrived, it was already too late. Half of the mansion had been consumed by flames. I stood there, watching the destruction unfold, my mind spinning. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. This was no accident. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy everything that had been left to me. But the worst part was realizing that Dylan had been part of this. He had stood there, watching, doing nothing to stop his mother and brother. They had all betrayed me, my own family. The days that followed were a blur of chaos. The police arrived, and I was able to give them the evidence I had recorded. But Margaret, Max, and Dylan had already disappeared. They had gone underground, evading the authorities. I couldn't believe it. My own husband had chosen to stand with his mother and brother over me. I didn't know what to do. I felt lost, heartbroken, and angry. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not after everything I had lost. I hired a lawyer, gathered all the evidence I had, and vowed to make them pay. I would get justice for my parents, for the mansion, and for myself. I wasn't going to let their greed and betrayal win. But little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The days after the fire felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The mansion was destroyed, my life was in chaos, and the betrayal was too much to bear. But I wasn't going to let it end there. I had to do something. I had to fight back. I called a lawyer, Mr. Thomas Anderson, a calm and experienced man who specialized in property disputes and fraud. The moment I met him, I knew he was the right person to handle my case. He listened to my story with patience, and as I showed him the videos and photos of the fire, he nodded gravely. "We can use this evidence," he said after a long pause, "but we need to gather more. If they're trying to run from the law, we need to be quick." He was right. As much as I wanted to focus on the emotional side of things, I knew I needed to build a solid case. We compiled every piece of evidence, phone recordings, photos of the security guard tied up, and any traces of their involvement. I knew my husband Dylan's role in all of this was undeniable, but I wasn't sure where they had gone. Dylan, Margaret, and Max had vanished without a trace, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something else. Something worse. The police had been notified immediately after the fire, but they were having trouble locating any of them. It seemed like they had all gone underground. They were smart, too smart for me to catch alone. I couldn't help but feel helpless. My own family had betrayed me, and now they were hiding, slipping away without facing any consequences. I was restless. Every day, I checked the news and the police reports, hoping for a breakthrough. I even went to the mansion site once, looking at the burned remnants of my parents' home, the place where so many memories had been created. It was painful, but I couldn't allow myself to mourn just yet. There was something more important to focus on: revenge. No, not just revenge. Justice. 1 week later, the breakthrough finally came. I received a call from Mr. Anderson early in the morning. His voice was steady but urgent. "Lena, they've been found. Your husband, mother-in-law, and brother-in-law were arrested this morning at the airport. They were trying to leave the country," he said. For a moment, I felt the weight of the words hit me. I could hardly believe it. They had tried to escape, to flee from what they had done, but they couldn't get away. The police had tracked them down just in time, and now they were facing serious charges. I didn't know whether to feel relief or anger. But in that moment, I realized that this was my chance to make them pay for everything they had taken from me. They had destroyed my parents' legacy and betrayed me in the worst possible way. Now they had to face the consequences. The charges were severe: arson, conspiracy, and property destruction, among others. I could hardly stand to think of my husband's involvement in all of this. I had trusted him, and he had thrown it all away. But there was no time for self-pity. I had to focus on the court case ahead. The trial was intense. I testified about everything: how Margaret and Max had set the fire, how I had captured the evidence on my phone, how Dylan had stood by and let it all happen. They denied it at first, but the evidence was irrefutable. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. Dylan, Margaret, and Max were ordered to sell their properties and compensate me for the loss of the mansion. But their punishment didn't end there. The court handed down prison sentences, and they were forced to face the consequences of their greed and betrayal. It wasn't the end I had imagined, but it was justice. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. They had been caught, and I had done what was right. But little did I know, this was just the beginning of my journey to reclaim my life. The aftermath of the trial was nothing like I imagined. I thought the verdict would give me closure, but instead, it left me with a bitter taste in my mouth. Justice had been served, but I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Dylan, the man I had once loved and trusted, was now a stranger. My own family, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law, had turned on me, and the house, the beautiful mansion that had been my parents' legacy, was gone. It wasn't just bricks and mortar that I had lost, it was the symbol of everything they had worked for. But as the days passed, I began to realize something important. I had won. I had fought back. I had stood strong, even when the people I loved the most had tried to tear me down. I wasn't just the victim of their betrayal anymore, I was the woman who had survived it. I had reclaimed my life, my power, and my future. And now it was time to build something new. I used the compensation money from the court order to make a fresh start. I didn't need another mansion. I didn't need to replace what was lost. Instead, I invested in myself. I focused on my career as an event planner, something I had always loved but hadn't had the time for while my life was consumed by the drama of the inheritance. I hired a new team and worked on some of the most exciting events of my career, finding satisfaction in helping others create moments that would last a lifetime. But more than that, I poured my energy into healing. I surrounded myself with people who cared about me, friends who had supported me through the toughest parts of my journey. They reminded me of who I was before all the chaos, the strong, independent woman who had a passion for life. I reconnected with old friends and even made new ones, rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried beneath the weight of the betrayal. I didn't forget the pain. I couldn't. But I learned how to live with it. I took the lessons I had learned from my parents about resilience, about standing tall no matter what life threw at you, and I applied them to every area of my life. The mansion might have been destroyed, but I realized that it wasn't the house that made me who I was. It was my strength, my ability to rise from the ashes. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, modest yet peaceful, I looked out over the city skyline, the soft glow of the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I thought about everything I had lost and everything I had gained. The pain of losing my parents, the betrayal of my own family, the destruction of the mansion, it all seemed so distant now. I had emerged from it all stronger, more self-assured, and ready to face whatever came next. The people who had betrayed me, Dylan, Margaret, Max, they were gone from my life. They were paying the price for their greed and deceit. But I didn't feel the anger anymore. I felt a sense of freedom. I was no longer defined by the actions of others. I was in control of my own story, and I would write the next chapter on my own terms. I moved forward, not forgetting what had happened, but using it as fuel to create a life that was mine, one built on my own hard work, integrity, and resilience. I may have lost my parents' mansion, but I gained something far more valuable: my independence, my peace, and the knowledge that no matter how deep the betrayal, I had the power to rise above it. As the sun set that evening, I realized I was ready for whatever came next. I had survived the worst, and now I could embrace the future with open arms. No longer weighed down by the past, I felt lighter, freer, and more confident than ever. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to live it.
If you have a problem, just leave.
The person who said that to me as I confronted my sister was my husband, Ryan, wearing a smug grin. Today was my sister Emily's wedding day. I wasn't in the mood to celebrate Emily, who had always looked down on me. But I eventually decided to attend because she begged me to come. However, at the reception, the only dish that was brought to me was a single pastry. Trembling with anger, I walked straight up to Emily and confronted her in a stern voice, despite its quietness. "Hey, what is the meaning of this?
What are you talking about?
Don't play dumb. Inviting me to your wedding only to serve me a pastry. How far do you have to go with your petty stunts to feel satisfied?"
It wasn't just to be petty. I was kinda hoping you'd get mad and leave.
What do you mean? I furrowed my brow, trying to understand her true intention, and Emily started explaining her plan. It turns out she wanted to provoke me into storming out of the wedding, using that as an excuse to get me to drop out of the inheritance dispute. I was stunned by how malicious the plan was when, before I realized it, my husband Ryan had approached and said, "If you have a problem, just leave. Why are you siding with her?" Before Ryan could answer, Emily responded instead.
Oh, Ryan was more than happy to help when I said I'd give him a share of the inheritance. Face it, you're loved by no one.
Emily spoke with a victorious tone, and Ryan, who had joined forces with her to humiliate me, didn't even flinch. Overwhelmed by their malice and the stares from others, I couldn't bear it anymore. Even though I knew I was giving Emily exactly what she wanted, I bolted from the reception hall, practically fleeing. Anger, sadness, frustration. As I stood waiting for a taxi, weighed down by that mess of emotions, Emily, who had just spent the entire evening tormenting me, came running toward me, her wedding dress dragging behind her. The moment she saw me, her face twisted with panic, and she cried out,
Help me, Chloe.
"My name is Chloe, and I'm 32 years old. Born as the eldest daughter of an ordinary family, I was raised surrounded by my parents' love. In a world where terms like toxic parents are often thrown around, I've always thought of myself as lucky to have such kind and supportive parents. However, despite having such wonderful parents, my childhood wasn't as happy as one might expect. The reason for that was my younger sister, Emily, who is 2 years younger than me. Emily was incredibly beautiful and smart, adored and spoiled by everyone since she was little. In contrast, I was average in both looks and brains, constantly being compared to her and often the subject of harsh gossip and belittling comments. I might have been able to endure that alone. What truly broke me was that Emily herself looked down on me. She would go out of her way to torment me, relishing the sight of me crying or upset. If our parents had witnessed her cruelty, they would have scolded her without hesitation. But clever Emily never bullied me in front of our parents. On the contrary, she would put on an innocent smile, cling to me saying, "Big sis," and act as if we were the closest of siblings. Our parents, completely unaware of her performance, genuinely believed we had a great relationship. If I had told them about Emily's harassment, they probably would have believed me. But I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth and shatter their happiness over our so-called sisterly bond. So I endured Emily's mistreatment in silence, never telling a soul. Emily's harassment continued even after we became adults. But by that time, we didn't see each other at home as often as we used to, so the impact wasn't as damaging as it had been during childhood. Also, as I grew older, I became able to brush off her snide remarks, which made things a bit easier. Even so, having Emily in my life remained a source of stress. However, when I got married and moved out, I was finally able to distance myself from her. My husband is a man named Ryan, who is 2 years older than me. After moving out, I now live with Ryan, just the two of us. It's supposed to be the blissful honeymoon phase of our marriage, but I'm already tired of living with him.
What's this? Is this all we're having for dinner? Don't you have anything else?
As soon as he got home from work, Ryan started criticizing the homemade meal I had set on the table. Tonight's dinner was salad, beef stew, and garlic bread. Sure, it wasn't the most extravagant meal, but I had put in the effort to cook despite having a full-time job. Couldn't he show even a little bit of gratitude? If you don't want to eat it, then don't, I said coldly, and he frowned as he sat down.
I didn't say that. You've got such a nasty attitude.
Without even saying, thanks for the meal, Ryan began eating dinner while scrolling through his phone. Despite all his complaining, he was devouring the food, practically eating like he intended to finish my portion too. I had no desire to sit down and eat with him, but if I didn't, he'd scarf down everything. Reluctantly, I sat at the table and began eating in silence. Before we got married, Ryan was a kind and thoughtful man. I fell in love with that side of him and decided to marry him. But was that kindness just an act? The moment we got married, his demeanor completely changed. He became like a different person. Before we got married, he used to say things like, "Let's share the household chores as much as we can," but now he leaves everything to me. And yet, he still finds reasons to complain about things like dinner. I also came to realize after some time that his change in attitude was at least partly connected to my father's company. My father was the CEO of a major corporation, but a year ago, he stepped down due to health issues and handed the company over to his successor so he could focus on his recovery. It seems that Ryan assumed I would eventually take over my father's position and marry me, expecting to benefit from that connection. However, I had my own dreams and had never even considered joining my father's company. When Ryan found out after our marriage that his expectations had completely fallen through, he became resentful, and his attitude toward me grew cold. I had no idea he married me with such a calculated mindset, so learning the truth was a huge shock. Even so, considering my modest income and not wanting to worry my ailing father, I couldn't bring myself to make the immediate decision to divorce. So, I reluctantly continued my married life with Ryan. Meanwhile, Emily decided on her own to join my father's company and seems to be steadily climbing the career ladder. However, she apparently shows little concern for our ailing father. Since our mother has already passed away, I visit my father from time to time to check on him. But Emily hardly ever returns home, maybe only a few times a year, if that. My father smiled and said, "Emily's probably busy with a lot of things," but his expression seemed a little lonely. Then one day, I got a rare phone call from Emily.
Hey, Chloe. I'm getting married soon. You're coming to my wedding, right?
I was surprised by the sudden announcement, but when I thought about it, Emily was already 30 years old. It wasn't surprising that she had someone she was dating. A wedding is supposed to be a happy occasion, but I still don't care much for Emily. If possible, I wanted to decline the invitation. As I hesitated to respond, Emily, seemingly sensing my thoughts, spoke in an uncharacteristically soft voice.
Dad said it'll be hard for him to attend because of his illness. If you don't come, there won't be anyone sitting in the family seats.
Hearing that my father wouldn't be attending made me even less inclined to go. Unable to make a decision right away, I simply replied, "I'll think about it," and hung up the phone. Just then, Ryan, who I'd barely had any real conversations with lately, spoke to me for a change.
Something happened?
My sister, Emily's getting married. She wants me to come to her wedding.
Wow, that's great news. You're going, right?
Ryan spoke as if it was the most obvious thing in the world, and I frowned as I answered, "Don't make it sound so simple. You know about my relationship with her, don't you?" I had told Ryan about the rift between me and Emily before we got married. Still, I couldn't believe he was casually encouraging me to attend.
I know you told me about that, but it wouldn't hurt to go to her wedding, would it?
At Ryan's words, I fell silent, thinking for a moment. To be honest, I couldn't care less whether Emily got married or not, but Ryan might be right. Maybe I should attend the wedding as family, at the very least. It would be sad if none of her family members attended the wedding. Even though I wasn't enthusiastic about it, I eventually decided to attend Emily's wedding. And so, the day of the wedding arrived. Emily had also invited Ryan along with me, so the two of us headed to the venue together. The wedding proceeded without a hitch, and Emily, dressed in her wedding gown, stood before the priest with the groom, pledging eternal love. It was supposed to be a deeply moving moment, but I felt nothing in particular. I simply watched the ceremony out of a sense of obligation and gave a half-hearted round of applause. Next to me, Ryan was smiling, looking more like real family than I did. After the ceremony, it was time for the reception. By this point, I was already exhausted, but leaving early wasn't an option. Mustering the last of my strength, I headed to the reception hall with Ryan. We took our seats and waited for the reception to begin.
The bride and groom will now make their entrance.
At last, the reception began, and Emily, now in a glamorous gown, entered with her groom. She smiled as she walked down the aisle between the guests, and at one point, she glanced at me and gave a small, knowing smile. That smile sent a wave of unease through me, but I couldn't very well stop her mid-entrance to demand an explanation. I frowned and gave a half-hearted clap as I watched Emily pass by. Once the bride and groom took their seats, the welcome speeches and toasts concluded, and the staff began bringing out the food. One of the best parts of a wedding is getting to enjoy gourmet dishes you wouldn't normally have the chance to eat. I was looking forward to at least enjoying the meal, so I waited eagerly for my plate to arrive. The first dish was placed in front of Ryan, a lavish plate that only heightened my anticipation. Then, the staff placed a dish in front of me, but to my shock, it was a single pastry. I was so stunned that my mouth fell open and I froze in place. However, I quickly regained my composure and hastily called out to a nearby staff member. "Well, isn't this some kind of mistake?" The staff member gave me an awkward look, glancing back and forth between the pastry and Emily before responding.
"Well, this was a special request from the bride. She said, 'My sister loves pastries, so please prepare one just for her.'"
At that response, I understood everything. Emily was pulling another one of her cruel pranks on me. I realized that keeping the staff any longer would only make things awkward for him, so I thanked him and let him go. He nodded politely, though he still looked confused, and walked away. Just then, A loud burst of laughter rang out from beside me. Startled, I turned to see Ryan laughing as if he found the whole thing hilarious, despite the situation. I glanced over at Emily, and sure enough, she was laughing too, along with her groom, as they both mocked me. It seemed that this prank wasn't just Emily's doing. The groom and Ryan were in on it too. I had felt something was off when Ryan insisted I attend the wedding, and now I knew why. Trembling with anger, I marched up to Emily and, despite keeping my voice low, demanded an explanation in a firm tone. Hey, what is the meaning of this?
What are you talking about?
Don't play dumb. You went out of your way to invite me to your wedding only to serve me a pastry? How far do you need to go with your harassment to be satisfied? Emily giggled softly and leaned in, speaking in a low voice so no one else could hear.
It wasn't just to mess with you. I was hoping you'd get angry and leave.
What do you mean? I frowned, unable to grasp her true intention. If she didn't want me at her wedding so badly, she shouldn't have invited me in the first place. It wasn't like I wanted to be here. If skipping the wedding had been an option, I would have gladly stayed away. Emily smirked and said something nonsensical. I thought that wouldn't be a strong enough reason. What do you mean by strong enough?
As a reason to make you drop out of the inheritance battle.
Stunned by her unexpected words, I stared at her in disbelief as she began proudly explaining her true motive.
I believe all of Dad's wealth should go to me, the successful one. But if you're around, half of the inheritance would automatically go to you. So I wanted to provoke you into leaving early and then report to Dad that you walked out in the middle of my wedding.
I was speechless at the sheer malice behind Emily's scheme. I had assumed that this outrageous act was simply because she hated me, but I never imagined it was all about the inheritance. Realizing her true aim, I felt a chill run through me as I cautiously asked, Did you join Dad's company for that reason too?
Of course. It was all to make the company mine. That's why I went out of my way to marry the heir of one of our business partners.
The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. To use marriage as a tool to gain wealth. In a daze, I looked over at the groom. He was grinning smugly, just like Emily. It was clear that he knew everything and had married her fully aware of her ambitions. It became clear to me that their relationship was purely transactional, with no trace of genuine affection between them. At that moment, Ryan, who had come up beside me without me noticing, sneered and said,
If you've got a problem, just leave.
I turned to him with a look of utter disgust and asked in a voice as cold as ice, And why are you helping Emily with this? It wasn't Ryan who answered. Emily let out a gleeful laugh and said in a triumphant tone,
Oh, Ryan was more than happy to help when I said I'd share the inheritance with him. Face it, you're not loved by anyone.
She seemed overjoyed that Ryan had taken her side. Emily seemed to be basking in her sense of superiority. That expression of hers was all too familiar, and it stirred painful memories from the past. Emily had always loved isolating me. Whenever my friends started siding with her, she would wear that same smug look she had now. I had hoped that she'd matured a little as an adult, but this moment painfully reminded me how naive I'd been. Emily hadn't changed at all since we were kids. Just then, I felt the weight of eyes on me and glanced around. The guests were all watching us, observing the tense scene unfold. Even though we had been speaking in hushed voices, our hostile atmosphere must have clued them in that something was wrong. People were whispering to one another, their expressions filled with concern. Even though I hadn't done anything wrong, the weight of their stares made me feel unbearably uncomfortable. Then my eyes fell on the pastry sitting on the table in front of me, and in that instant, I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. Even though I knew it was exactly what Emily wanted, I fled the hall as though escaping. Anger, sadness, frustration. Carrying all those tangled emotions, I stood waiting for a taxi when I suddenly heard Emily's voice behind me. "Chloe, help me!" I turned around and saw Emily, dragging her dress as she ran toward me, her face on the verge of tears. I furrowed my brow, unable to grasp the situation, but I decided it was no longer my concern and moved to get into the taxi. Just then, someone else called out to me.
"Chloe."
A hand gently rested on my shoulder as I turned to see my father, his face stern. I widened my eyes in surprise and froze. In the meantime, my father apologized to the driver and sent the taxi away. "Dad, when did you get here?"
"I was already there when the reception started. I saw you leaving the hall."
When Emily's wedding was finalized, I had told my father about it. However, my father hadn't been informed of the wedding by Emily, which struck him as strange. Looking back now, it was clear that Emily had purposely kept the wedding a secret from him to ensure he wouldn't find out about her scheme. Unaware of this at the time, I decided to secretly invite my father to the reception as a surprise for Emily, who loved surprises. I had already coordinated everything with the staff and framed it as a surprise gift for the bride. After getting approval from my father's doctor, we arranged for him to make a brief appearance at the reception. I hadn't known his exact plans for the day, but it seemed he arrived early and waited quietly. When he saw me rushing out of the hall, he was alarmed and immediately went to Emily. Emily, her husband, and Ryan must have been completely shocked when my father suddenly appeared.
She was so flustered she couldn't explain anything, but the guests told me what happened. "I can't believe the three of them conspired to harass you like that, Chloe."
My father glared at Emily with a furious expression, his face like that of a demon. Emily began trembling, visibly frightened. It was the first time I'd ever seen my gentle, soft-spoken father so visibly enraged. I was shocked, but Emily, who was on the receiving end of his fury, must have been even more stunned. The reason she came after me was probably to escape our father's wrath, even if only for a moment.
"What kind of grudge do you have against Chloe? Why would you do something like that?"
No, Dad. You've got it all wrong. Chloe loves pastries, so I thought I was doing something nice for her.
She tried to make me walk out of the wedding and use that as an excuse to cut me out of the inheritance. Emily's face twisted in shock at my sudden interjection. But I didn't care about her reaction anymore. I had decided to tell my father everything, including everything that had happened up until now. "Dad, this isn't the first time she's harassed me." Hearing about the countless ways Emily had tormented me, my father's eyes widened in disbelief. As he learned the full details of her latest scheme, his face grew red with fury. His entire body trembled as he grabbed Emily's arm firmly, making her pale with fear.
What?
Just come with me.
With surprising strength for someone battling illness, my father stormed back into the reception hall. I hurried after him, trying to keep up. When we entered the hall, the room was in an uproar. It was no surprise, after all. The bride had abruptly run out in her wedding dress. My father, looking calm despite the chaos, took the microphone from the bewildered MC and apologized to the guests.
Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. I sincerely apologize for how things have turned out. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be canceling today's wedding.
A louder wave of shocked murmurs spread through the hall. But my father remained completely unfazed, continuing with calm authority.
Of course, any gifts and monetary offerings will be returned. As a token of our apology, we invite you to enjoy the meal that has been prepared. Please at least stay and enjoy the food.
After offering one final, sincere apology, my father led both couples, my sister and her groom, as well as their families, into a private room. As soon as everyone was gathered, my father turned to Emily and delivered his verdict without mercy.
First, you're disowned. I no longer consider you my daughter.
Wait. Dad. You can't disown me. Please, no.
Without sparing a glance at Emily, who was crying and shouting in despair, my father turned his attention to the groom and his family.
As for your company, I'm terminating our contract effective immediately. I'll personally inform your CEO, so you should prepare for that.
The color drained from their faces all at once. The groom and his mother were utterly devastated, too shocked to speak, but the groom's father couldn't stay silent. Though pale and trembling, he managed to force out a rebuttal.
I apologize for what my son has done, but isn't this a separate matter? Personal grievances should never interfere with business relationships.
My decision wasn't based on personal feelings alone. Your company has been operating in the red for quite some time, hasn't it? With no signs of improvement, I had already planned to terminate the contract sooner or later.
My father's calm rebuttal left the groom's father speechless. His shoulders slumped, and he stared blankly into the distance, completely defeated. Seeing his father in such a state, the groom furrowed his brows and stormed toward Emily.
This is all your fault. Look what you've done.
What? You were on board with this plan too. Don't you dare pin everything on me now.
And so, the couple's argument began. My father watched their ugly blame game with a cold, indifferent gaze. I also watched their exchange with a sense of disbelief and disgust. Then, I suddenly glanced over at my own husband. Ryan, acting as though none of this concerned him, was casually scrolling through his phone. I marched straight over to him, and as he looked up at me with a puzzled expression, I spoke firmly. We're getting a divorce.
What?
Ryan's eyes widened as he shouted in disbelief at my sudden declaration.
Divorce? Are you kidding me? What did I even do?
You teamed up with Emily to sabotage me. If anyone should be saying this is ridiculous, it's me. As Ryan tried to brazenly shout me down, I raised my voice even louder, throwing my fury right back at him. Perhaps overwhelmed by my anger, Ryan's face twisted nervously as he stumbled a step backward. After shooting Ryan a glare, I turned to Emily and made my declaration. I'm going to demand compensation from both you and Ryan.
Compensation?
What are you talking about, Chloe?
They both shouted in shock, their voices nearly overlapping, but I didn't let it faze me and continued. After everything you've done, you didn't seriously think you'd walk away without consequences, did you? You're adults. Take responsibility for your actions.
For something like this, you're really asking for compensation?
Chloe. I'm sorry.
Emily's voice cut off Ryan's indignant protest as she rushed over to me, apologizing desperately. It was the first time in my entire life that Emily had ever apologized to me.
It was all my fault. I'll never do anything like this again. Please, forgive me.
Emily's eyes shimmered with tears as she looked up at me, clinging desperately. With her beautiful face contorted into such a pleading expression, most people would probably feel their hearts soften. But to me, someone who knew her true nature, it was nothing but an act. She wasn't genuinely remorseful. She just didn't want to pay compensation and was pretending to be sorry. There was no point in listening to such an insincere apology. And even if she were truly sorry, I couldn't possibly forgive her after everything she had done. Looking down at Emily as she begged, I coldly declared, "It's useless. Save your breath and get the money ready."
That's so cruel. I'm apologizing. Can't you just forgive me?
I sighed in exasperation, covering my face as Emily continued to wail and play the victim. Emily had always been like this. Whenever things didn't go her way, she would cry and paint me as the villain. But this time, there was no one left to side with her. Even her groom was looking at her with a cold, disinterested expression. Just as I was about to put an end to her pathetic performance, I noticed something was wrong with my father. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead, and his face was twisted in pain. He should have been resting, but the stress and exertion had clearly taken a toll on his health. Panicked, I rushed to his side and steadied his swaying body. "Dad, are you okay? Let's go back home."
Wait a minute. Are you trying to run away? This conversation isn't over yet.
I wrapped my arm around my father's trembling shoulders and walked away, leaving Emily behind as she continued to selfishly make a scene. After escorting my father home, I returned to my own house. My decision to get a divorce hadn't changed, but issues like finances and finding a place to live meant I couldn't leave immediately. As I began packing my things to prepare for the move, Ryan came home late at night and approached me with a sickeningly sweet voice.
Come on, don't be so mad. I'm sorry for what happened today. Let's not rush into this whole divorce thing, okay?
He gave my shoulder a light pat, and a wave of revulsion spread through my entire body. It seemed my body was completely rejecting him now. "Stop it." I jerked away, swatting his hand aside, his expression darkened with irritation. But perhaps realizing that arguing wouldn't help his case, he forced a strained smile.
Come on, don't be like that. If your income's suddenly gone, things are gonna get tough around here. And I need you to keep handling the housework too.
Hearing his true feelings, I let out a sigh. I had expected as much. He wasn't against the divorce because he didn't want to lose me, but because he didn't want to lose the financial support and the free labor I provided at home. I had no intention of wasting my life any longer for someone like that. That said, I couldn't ignore the fact that I didn't have a stable income of my own and was still dependent on his. A quick divorce was going to be difficult. As I wrestled with these thoughts, days passed, and we continued our daily routines as if nothing had happened. Ryan, convinced that I had given up on the idea of divorce, started acting arrogant again. But, of course, I hadn't given up at all. I was simply figuring out how to survive on my current income once I was on my own. One quiet afternoon on a weekend, our doorbell rang, even though we weren't expecting any visitors. Puzzled, I opened the door and found an elderly man in a suit standing there with a young woman by his side. Thinking they might be salespeople, I cautiously asked, "Hi, who are you?" Just then, Ryan, who had only just woken up around noon, shuffled over lazily, yawning as he approached.
Who is it on a day off? If it's a salesperson, just send them away.
His tone was rude as he glanced at the visitors. But the moment his eyes landed on the older man, Ryan let out a small yelp. His legs gave out and he dropped onto the floor with a thud. Behind me, Ryan's eyes widened in terror as he shouted,
The CEO?
Ryan's words shocked me as well, and I stared at the two visitors in front of me. The elderly man glared at Ryan before handing me a business card and introducing himself. It really was the CEO of Ryan's company. Still confused as to why the CEO himself was standing at our door, I hesitantly returned his greeting. At that moment, the young woman beside him stepped forward and spoke in a calm, steady voice.
"I apologize for the sudden visit. I'll explain everything."
She introduced herself as one of Ryan's coworkers from the public relations department at the same large bakery company. She was also a friend of Emily's and had attended the wedding a few days ago. It seemed she had witnessed the scene where I was publicly humiliated during the reception. That alone had left her feeling disgusted. But then she noticed something even more troubling. The pastry used to harass me had been one of their company's products. She had been deeply upset that their brand was used in such a way. But what disturbed her even more was that Ryan, her colleague, had laughed during the whole ordeal. She explained that she had been shocked and outraged when she saw Ryan's behavior and immediately reported it to her superior. Upon hearing the story, the CEO decided to personally come and apologize, which was why they had both shown up at our house.
Even though he's your husband, I sincerely apologize that one of our employees used our company's product to humiliate you. I take full responsibility and offer my deepest apologies.
No, it's not your fault, sir. Receiving such a polite and formal apology from someone so unexpected left me flustered and unsure how to respond. As I stood there, overwhelmed, the CEO turned his piercing gaze to Ryan, who was still sitting on the floor in shock. With an unwavering voice, he declared,
A public relations officer who doesn't respect or care for our products has no place in this company. You're fired, effective immediately.
Wait, please, sir. You're firing me over something like this?
Ryan frantically raised his voice in protest. But when the CEO shot him a sharp glare, he fell silent. Then the CEO's expression softened, and he turned to me with an unexpected proposal.
This may be presumptuous of me, but would you be willing to design a character for our company?
What? I never expected Ryan's company CEO to ask me for such a thing. Dumbfounded, my mouth slightly open. I was indeed working as an illustrator, but I wasn't particularly well known yet. Why would the CEO of Ryan's company know about me? Sensing my confusion, the young woman beside him smiled and answered my unspoken question.
The truth is, I'm a big fan of your work. When I showed your illustrations to the CEO, he thought your style would be a perfect fit for our company's image. And that's how this idea came about.
My face flushed with excitement, and my heart raced at this unexpected stroke of luck. With a job this big, I could support myself comfortably on my own income. Determined not to let this incredible opportunity slip away, I accepted the offer without hesitation. It would be an honor. I'm looking forward to working with you. I grasped the young woman's hand firmly as I spoke. She seemed a bit surprised by my enthusiasm, but quickly broke into a smile and warmly squeezed my hand in return. Then I turned around and, with a bright smile, spoke to Ryan, who was staring at the scene in utter disbelief. Thanks for waiting. Now I can finally get that divorce.
What?
As soon as I find a place to live, I'll move out. I'll send you the bill for the alimony later. Don't forget.
Wait, hold on a second.
Ryan mumbled something under his breath, but I ignored him completely and continued discussing the project details with the CEO and his colleague. Later, my divorce from Ryan was finalized, and I was finally free of him. Ryan had resisted until the very end, insisting, I won't agree to the divorce. But when he realized I was absolutely unwavering, he finally gave in. With a scowl, he signed the divorce papers. Having lost both his family and his job, Ryan became a hollow shell of himself, drifting from one temporary job to another. It seemed his dismissal from his previous company left a stain that made it difficult for him to find another permanent position. The older he gets, the harder it will be for him to secure a stable job, so he's likely in for a rough time ahead. But none of that has anything to do with me anymore. As long as Ryan paid the alimony, I couldn't care less what happened to him. Meanwhile, Emily, who had been disowned by our father, became the subject of bad rumors spread by her co-workers who attended the wedding. Unable to withstand the shame, she eventually resigned from her job. As for the groom's company, which was informed of the contract termination during the reception, their financial situation worsened until they went bankrupt. Because of this, the newlywed couple argued constantly and ended up divorcing shortly after. Considering their marriage lacked any real love to begin with, I suppose this outcome was inevitable. After the divorce, I quickly moved into an apartment perfect for living on my own and began enjoying a comfortable life. My father kindly told me I was welcome to move back into the family home, but I didn't want to burden him, especially considering his health. So I gratefully accepted the offer in spirit, but politely declined. However, to ensure I could be there quickly if anything happened, I chose a new apartment close to my family home. Now I'll be able to visit my father more often than ever. The project I received from my ex-husband's former company was successfully completed, and the character I designed was well received by both employees and customers alike. Thanks to that job, my recognition as an illustrator grew, and new commissions started pouring in. I'm so busy now that I barely have time to rest, but I find this kind of business refreshing. Being able to make a living doing what I love is a dream come true. Having left my marriage behind and embraced a fresh start, I'm living each day to the fullest, moving forward toward a bright future.
On a family trip, my husband suddenly stopped the car and demanded I sign away the $100 million inheritance from my parents. When I refused, my ruthless mother-in-law forced me to sign and then pushed me off a cliff into the sea, coldly saying, "Goodbye, your chapter is over." But against all odds, I survived and returned to take revenge in a way they never saw coming. I always thought my life was a fairy tale. I met Adam Williams when we were both in college, and from the very first time I saw him, I knew he was the one. He had that warm smile, the one that could make anyone feel at ease, and those eyes that sparkled with kindness. We spent hours talking, studying together, laughing, and sharing our dreams about the future. It didn't take long for us to fall in love. After graduation, we got married in a small ceremony surrounded by our closest friends and family. I thought we had it all, a perfect life, a beautiful home, and most importantly, we had each other. We moved to Austin, Texas, shortly after, where Adam started working for a private company. He was ambitious, driven, and a true professional. I was content being a supportive wife, and while I worked for a time, I eventually decided to stay at home. I focused on making our home warm and welcoming for Adam after a long day's work. We had our routines, our plans, and our love. It was everything I had ever wanted. But then things started changing, and I could feel it in the air, though I didn't know exactly what it was. It all started with my mother-in-law, Catherine. Catherine had always been a strong presence in our lives. In the beginning, she seemed to like me well enough, or so I thought. But after we got married, it was as though something shifted. She became distant and, at times, downright rude. I tried to be patient, understanding, and respectful. I wanted to be the perfect daughter-in-law. But no matter how hard I tried, I could never do anything right in her eyes. She often criticized the way I decorated our home, the way I cooked, even the way I dressed. "You should dress more like this," she'd say, or "This house doesn't look like a home. It looks too modern." Everything I did seemed to irritate her. But I tried to stay calm, thinking it would get better with time. What I didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a much deeper problem. A few years later, my world was shattered when I lost both of my parents in a tragic accident. It was a devastating blow, one I'm still struggling to heal from. But as the dust settled and I tried to find my way through the grief, something unexpected happened. I inherited everything they had left behind. It wasn't just money. It was the family mansion, a grand estate that had been in my family for generations. The mansion was everything to me. It was a symbol of my parents' love and hard work, the place where I grew up, where I made memories with them. When I first walked through the mansion after the funeral, it felt like a part of them was still there, in every corner of the house. I knew that no matter what, I could never sell it. It meant too much to me. It was my legacy, my connection to my parents, and the one thing I could hold on to in their absence. But that was when things took a sharp turn. Catherine began pressuring me to sell the mansion. She told me I should use the money to start a business for Adam. "It's too big for just one person," she would say. "You don't need it. Think about what you could do with all that money." The insinuation was always the same: sell the house, get rid of it, and put the money to better use. She would bring it up constantly, almost every time she visited. It felt like she wasn't just trying to help. She was trying to control. I told her repeatedly that I couldn't sell the mansion. "This house is all I have left of my parents," I said. "I can't just give it away." But Catherine wasn't giving up. And neither was Adam. Adam, who had always been so kind and understanding, started to change. He sided with his mother more and more, and the pressure to sell grew even stronger. He would tell me, "Olivia, it's just a house. We could use the money to do so much. It would help me start my business, and we could finally live comfortably." But I refused. I couldn't understand why they couldn't see how important this mansion was to me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about preserving the memory of my parents. But my refusal seemed to have set something in motion that I couldn't have predicted. It all came to a head during a family trip to California. Adam and I were supposed to be celebrating a peaceful getaway, a break from everything. We rented a car and drove along the breathtaking coastline, the ocean stretching out endlessly before us. It was beautiful, a perfect moment to unwind. But then something changed. As we were driving through a particularly secluded part of the coast, Adam suddenly pulled the car over. He didn't say a word at first. I was surprised but assumed he was stopping to enjoy the view. But when he turned to me, his face was serious, almost cold. "Olivia," he said, his voice low, "I need you to sign these papers. Right now." I stared at him, confused. "What papers?" "They're the transfer papers for the mansion. You're going to sign them, and we'll finally be able to move forward with the business plan I've been telling you about." My heart sank. "Adam, no. I told you, I can't sell the house. You know how much it means to me." His expression hardened, and I could see the frustration in his eyes. "You don't understand, Olivia. This is for our future. For our family. If you don't sign, there will be consequences." Before I could even process what he was saying, Catherine, who had been silent up until then, spoke up from the back seat. "Sign it, Olivia. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. This is what's best for everyone." I felt trapped. I tried to speak, to reason with them, but they were both unyielding. Adam's voice turned cold. "You either sign it now, or we'll make you regret it." The words stung, but nothing could prepare me for what happened next. I refused again, and that was when the unthinkable happened. Adam's eyes darkened, and without warning, he grabbed my arm, pulling me out of the car. Catherine, too, was suddenly all force and control. They both pushed me towards the cliffside. I couldn't understand what was happening. Panic gripped me as I stumbled backward. "Sign it, Olivia," Adam demanded, "or this chapter of your life is over." And in that moment, I realized they weren't just talking about the house. They were talking about my life. I was terrified, desperate, and with my heart racing, I did the only thing I could do to survive. I signed the papers. But even as I did, I knew it wouldn't be the end of the story. What came next was the last thing I could ever have expected. I don't know how long I stood there, trembling after I signed the papers. My heart was racing, my hands shaking as I held the pen. Adam and Catherine didn't seem to care. They just stared at me, their eyes hard and cold. They believed they had won, they thought they had control of everything. Adam, still silent, shoved me away from the car, his face twisted in disgust. "Now, we can finally move on," he muttered under his breath. I barely heard him. I was too focused on the fact that I had just signed away everything that mattered to me. Everything my parents had worked for, everything they had left behind for me. And they didn't even flinch. They shoved me further towards the cliffside, and I could feel my legs weakening, my mind scrambling for any possible way to escape. But there was nowhere to run. They had planned this. They had planned for me to give in, and I had done just that, out of fear, out of desperation, just to survive. I signed my inheritance away, and now there was nothing left to do but hope that somehow I'd make it through this. "Get out of the car," Adam ordered, his voice flat, emotionless. It felt like a nightmare. I didn't want to believe what was happening, but as they pulled me from the car and forced me closer to the edge of the cliff, the reality set in. My breath caught in my throat as I looked down at the jagged rocks far below, the endless blue of the sea crashing against them. I could barely comprehend what they were about to do. "Say goodbye, Olivia," Catherine said coldly, her voice barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the air like a knife. And then, in a split second, they both pushed me. I remember the sharp gasp that escaped my lips as I stumbled and fell. I could hear their voices fading, their laughter echoing in my ears. "This chapter is over," they said, as if my life meant nothing. The fall felt like an eternity, but it all happened so fast. One moment I was on solid ground, the next, I was plunging into the air, screaming, as the world spun around me. The wind roared in my ears, and the ground below seemed to rise up to meet me with terrifying speed. But then, something miraculous happened. Instead of crashing into the rocks below, I felt a sharp tug, and suddenly, I was hitting the cold water. The shock of the cold water sent a jolt through my body, and for a moment, I couldn't think. My lungs burned, and the world was dark and swirling around me. I struggled, gasping for air, but the waves were strong, and the current was pulling me under. I thought that was it. I thought I had died. But then, something pulled me to the surface, a strong arm around my waist, lifting me from the water. "Hold on," a voice called, and I tried to focus on it, tried to stay conscious. I had no strength left, but somehow, I clung to the hope that I wasn't alone. The man, whoever he was, pulled me to the shore, dragging me across the wet sand. My body was aching, my head spinning, but I managed to blink and take in my surroundings. I was on the edge of the cliff, the spot where Adam and Catherine had pushed me. The man had saved me. He was tall, with short brown hair and kind, steady eyes. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing. Without a word, he moved me into the safety of a small cabin nearby, a small, rustic place by the sea. "You're safe now," he said, his voice calm, comforting. "You're going to be okay." I couldn't respond. I could barely speak. I was too exhausted, too shaken to process everything that had happened. I had barely survived a fall from a cliff, and here I was breathing alive. The man, whose name I later learned was Ethan, wrapped me in a thick blanket and made me tea to calm me down. I was trembling, not just from the cold, but from the shock of everything that had happened. My mind kept racing, replaying the events over and over again. Adam and Catherine had tried to kill me. They thought they had won, that they had everything they wanted. But they had made a fatal mistake. They thought I was gone. They thought they had gotten rid of me. But I was alive, and I wasn't going to let them get away with what they had done. For the next few days, Ethan took care of me. He gave me food, shelter, and clothing. He listened patiently as I told him what had happened, though I couldn't explain everything all at once. I was still in shock, still trying to understand the depth of the betrayal. Adam, the man I had loved and trusted, had turned on me. Catherine, too, the woman I had tried so hard to get along with. Together, they had pushed me to the edge of death. But I wasn't going to let them win. No, I wasn't going to stay silent and let them get away with this. They thought they had stolen everything from me, but I still had something they didn't. My life. I stayed with Ethan for a few days, recovering both physically and mentally. And during that time, I made a decision. I wasn't going to run away. I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. I was going to fight back. I was going to take back everything they had tried to take from me. I hired a lawyer. I filed for divorce. I would not let Adam and Catherine think they had succeeded. They had pushed me off a cliff, but they didn't know the power of my will. I would make them pay. I would show them that no amount of money, no amount of manipulation, could destroy me. I was stronger than they could ever imagine. And so, I began to prepare for the next step. It wasn't just about the mansion anymore.
It was about justice.
It was about proving that no one could betray me and walk away unscathed. I wasn't the same woman who had been pushed off that cliff. No, I had been reborn, and the fire inside me was burning brighter than ever. I had been through hell, but I survived, and I was going to make sure that Adam and Catherine paid for what they had done. It wasn't just about the mansion anymore. It was about taking back my life, my dignity, and my future. I started by filing for divorce. That was the first step. I had to sever all ties with Adam, the man I once loved, the man who had betrayed me so completely. The moment I walked into the lawyer's office, I knew there was no turning back. The papers were signed, and the process was set in motion. I remember sitting across from my lawyer, a woman named Julia, who had been recommended by Ethan. She was calm, professional, and knew exactly what to do. She didn't need to ask me much. She could see the determination in my eyes. "We'll fight this, Olivia," she said, her voice firm. "We'll make sure they can't get away with it." I told Julia everything. The threats, the manipulation, the forced signature on the transfer documents. I explained how Adam and Catherine had tried to kill me, how they had pushed me off that cliff, and how they thought I was dead. They had believed I would never come back, that I wouldn't survive to expose their lies and greed. Julia listened carefully, taking notes, then looked up at me. "We have something they don't expect. Proof of your survival and the circumstances surrounding the signature. That fake transfer, it's not valid. They coerced you." We can prove it. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. There was hope. Real hope. It wasn't just about fighting for the mansion anymore. It was about making sure Adam and Catherine were held accountable for their actions. They had tried to destroy me, and I was going to make sure they faced the consequences. As the divorce proceedings began, I couldn't help but wonder how Adam and Catherine were reacting. They must have thought they were in the clear. After all, they believed they had successfully gotten me out of the way. They believed they now controlled the mansion. But they were about to be hit with a shocking truth. I wasn't dead, and I hadn't signed those papers willingly. I had signed under duress, and that made all the difference. A few weeks later, the court hearings began. Adam and Catherine were both there, sitting with their lawyer, looking smug and confident. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they had won, that I had just rolled over and given up. But they didn't know that I had been preparing. I had the documents, the evidence, and the legal backing to destroy their entire plan. I could see it in their eyes when they saw me walk into that courtroom. They weren't expecting me. They were expecting a grieving widow, someone who had given up and moved on. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was strong, determined, and ready to make them pay. When the lawyer presented the forged signature, the one I had signed under extreme pressure and fear for my life, Adam and Catherine's faces went pale. The shock on their faces was enough to make my heart race with satisfaction. They didn't expect this. They didn't expect me to be alive. They didn't expect that I would come back and fight for everything they had taken from me. And as the judge began to read through the evidence, I felt a surge of hope. Justice was coming. And no matter how hard Adam and Catherine tried, they were going to lose everything. The days leading up to the final hearing felt like an eternity. I could barely sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of what would happen in that courtroom. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let Adam and Catherine get away with what they had done. They had tried to steal my life, my legacy, my parents' mansion, and now they were going to pay for it. On the day of the final hearing, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. Adam and Catherine were already there, sitting with their lawyer, looking smug, as if they had already won. They didn't know it yet, but everything they had done was about to unravel. The first few hours of the hearing felt like a blur, but then the moment came. Julia, my lawyer, presented the evidence, the forged documents, the witnesses who had seen Adam and Catherine push me towards the cliff, and the testimony that I had been coerced into signing the transfer papers. I could see Adam and Catherine growing more nervous as the case unfolded. They thought they had covered their tracks, but they hadn't counted on one thing: my resilience. When it was my turn to speak, I could barely contain the emotion. I told the court everything: how Adam had turned on me, how Catherine had manipulated me, and how they had both tried to kill me. I spoke of the fear, the helplessness I had felt in those final moments before they pushed me off the cliff. But most importantly, I spoke of how I survived. I told them how I had been saved by a stranger, how I had come back to reclaim my life. As I finished speaking, I looked directly at Adam and Catherine. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. They thought I was dead. They thought they had won. But now, the truth was out. The judge listened carefully to all the evidence, and when it was time to deliver the verdict, there was no hesitation. Adam Williams and Catherine Williams, the judge said, his voice steady, "You are guilty of multiple charges, including fraud, coercion, and attempted murder. You are hereby sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and the court orders the invalidation of the transfer of property." I could hardly believe it. They had been convicted. Adam and Catherine were going to prison, and the mansion, my parents' legacy, would remain in my hands. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, mixed with a deep, overwhelming sense of justice. They had tried to take everything from me, but I had fought back, and I had won. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't the same woman who had been pushed off that cliff. I had come back stronger, and now I was finally free. The mansion was mine again, and more importantly, I had rid myself of the toxic people who had tried to destroy me. The road to justice hadn't been easy. There had been fear, pain, and betrayal along the way. But in the end, my strength, my resilience, and my unwavering belief in doing what was right had prevailed. Adam and Catherine had thought they could break me, but they underestimated me. And now, they would have to face the consequences of their actions. As for me, I stood tall, owning not just a $100 million mansion, but my life, my future. I had reclaimed everything they had tried to take from me. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened from here on out, I would always be stronger than they could ever imagine. The last chapter of my life had been written, and it was one of triumph, not defeat. I had survived, and I had won. My name is Freya, and I'm about to turn 25 this year. I've been happily married for 4 years, and my son, William, just celebrated his 4th birthday. When I first got married, I worked full-time, but now I balance part-time work at the same company. My husband, Henry, is 27 years older than me. Our relationship started with Henry being the one to pursue me passionately, but after we got married, I noticed a shift in his attitude, where he became more controlling. Henry has a sister, Aria, who is 23 years old. There's a bit of an age gap between them, and it seems that Henry tends to spoil her a little. Before we got married, I didn't mind Aria visiting often. I thought it was just a normal sibling bond, and I assumed they got along well. But after we tied the knot, I started noticing some changes in Aria's behavior. She began showing up at our place without calling first, expecting to be treated like a guest without ever offering to help or show any appreciation. What bothered me more was Freya's response. Instead of addressing the situation with Aria, he would expect me to accommodate her every time. Aria would come in, barely acknowledging me, and just casually say to Henry, "Hey, I'm here again," like it was completely normal. Even though I wasn't prepared to host another guest, I ended up serving dinner to her. Henry, instead of understanding the situation, would blame me out loud, saying I should have been more considerate. Aria would apologize, but it was clear she enjoyed Henry's favoritism. After dinner, while Henry and Aria sat chatting on the sofa, I was left with the leftovers. I had to make my own meal, and they didn't even acknowledge me or William. It felt like we were just there to serve them, not treated as family. One evening, as I was about to take a bath with William, Henry loudly interrupted, asking me to go buy a cake for Aria, even though it was already late. Aria insisted she wanted it right away, and Henry blamed me for the delay. Feeling pressured, I reluctantly agreed to go to the cake shop with William. As we walked, I overheard them criticizing me, calling me inconsiderate, and questioning why Henry even married me. Although William didn't understand the conversation, he could feel the tension between Henry and me. Trying to keep things light, I asked him what kind of cake he wanted, and he happily responded that he wanted one with lots of fruit. Our trip to the cake shop was full of cake talk, which for a moment helped me forget about the negative things Henry had said earlier. We made it to the shop just before closing time and managed to find the cake Aria wanted. We also bought the fruit cake that William had asked for. When we got home, I served the cakes to Henry and Aria, and then I made William's cake and took it to the dining room. The moment I placed his cake in front of him, Aria pointed at it and said she wanted that one. Before I could say anything, Henry moved William's cake in front of Aria, ignoring William's protests. Henry justified his action by saying he had paid for the cakes with his own money, so he had the right to choose for William. I couldn't hold my feelings in anymore. I told Henry how unfair it was, and in response, he threatened divorce. William, who had stopped crying, nervously grabbed my hand. After a moment, he said, "Mom, I also like cake with strawberries on it." It's really good, as he ate the cake Aria had wanted. Seeing that William was going through so much, I decided to take him away from the situation. I moved him to another room, so he could enjoy his cake peacefully. Henry apologized to Aria, saying he was sorry for being so stingy, but I held back, not wanting to argue in front of William. Watching William enjoy his cake, so happy and innocent, brought me some comfort. After we finished the cakes, we decided to take a late bath and sleep in William's bed. The next morning, when I was preparing breakfast, I realized Aria had already left. But soon, I heard William crying. To my shock, I found that his piggy bank, a gift from my father, had been broken and all the money he had saved was gone. William, who always said goodnight to his piggy bank, was heartbroken. When I asked Henry about it, he casually explained that Arya needed some money, so she had taken it from the piggy bank. Holding my crying, shaking son, I felt his pain so deeply that I couldn't help but cry with him. It hurt to see how much Henry was focused on taking care of his sister, Arya, over our own son. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I was angry and sad, so I confronted Henry, breaking my usual habit of staying silent during arguments, especially in front of William. Without saying a word, Henry walked into the bedroom and returned holding something shocking: divorce papers. I was stunned to find that Henry had been secretly hiding divorce papers, something I had no idea about. In an outburst, he shoved the papers at me and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. William, who had never cried about the issues between Henry and Arya before, seemed to have reached his breaking point. He cried non-stop since last night, and it broke my heart to see him like this. Feeling the weight of the situation, I suggested that we skip daycare for the day. To my surprise, William happily agreed, with a faint smile on his face. We spent the day together playing and bonding. William brought a picture book from the shelf, climbed onto my lap, and happily pointed to the teacher in the book, saying, "Mama, right? He looks like an angel." His little heart seemed full of patience, and in that moment, I decided to make the day special. I took a day off from work, despite the possible trouble it might cause at my job. My workplace understood the situation and kindly granted me the day off. We spent the morning at the park, playing hide and seek, having fun in the sandbox, and sliding down the slides. When we got back home for lunch, William looked sleepy. Normally, he would nap on his own, but today he fell asleep in my lap, just like when he was a baby. I had planned to use the time to do some household chores, but today felt different. Instead of cleaning, I decided to enjoy the peaceful moment and let myself be healed by the sight of William's calm, sleeping face and gentle breathing. Just as I was settling into this serene moment, I heard a noise from the front entrance. The door had opened, and since it wasn't the usual time for Henry to come home, I became suspicious. I quickly hid in the bedroom closet, holding William tightly. A voice echoed through the house, and to my surprise, it was Arya. I listened as she moved through the house, sounding frustrated as she searched for something. After a while, she made a phone call, mentioning Henry and talking about their failed search. I could hear her locking the front door as she left. Once I felt it was safe, I put William back to bed and sat down to think about what had just happened. I couldn't understand why Arya had entered our house, or what they had been looking for. Suddenly, Henry felt like a stranger to me, and I was filled with disgust and fear. Quickly, I packed some essentials for William and me and headed to the train station. We took a train to my parents' house, which was thankfully just 2 stations away. Although I hadn't contacted them beforehand, they could tell something was wrong just by looking at my face. They welcomed us without asking questions. Once we were settled, I told my parents everything about Henry, Arya, and the strange things that had been happening. I explained how I didn't feel safe staying at our house anymore. My mother suggested that Arya might have been searching for my belongings, possibly cash cards. As I thought about it, I recalled my past experience as a successful CEO in the handmade goods industry. When I got married, I handed over the business to trusted friends so I could focus on raising my child. Though I still worked part-time and kept in touch with the company, Henry had no idea that I was still the CEO. I remembered the divorce papers Henry had hidden, and I began to suspect that he thought I had a decent amount of savings. Although I had told him that I still received some money from the company, I had kept the details of my savings and my role as CEO private. Over time, I realized that Henry struggles with managing money and tends to spend all that he earns. Early in our marriage, Henry only gave me $200 a month for food, and even suggested that I quit my job to become a full-time housewife. But with the financial strain of raising William and barely having enough for food, I never agreed to stay home. Eventually, Henry reluctantly allowed me to work part-time. To keep him from asking for more money, I signed a post-marital property waiver through a lawyer, and since William was born, I've used my savings to cover his nursery fees and buy him clothes. Even though I only received $200 for food, I never asked Henry for more money. He must have assumed I had savings, especially considering Arya's apparent need for money. I also thought they might have been looking for my cash cards. I have a separate savings account for William, into which a portion of my salary is deposited every month. But I always carry my valuables with me, so they won't find anything if they were searching for it. What was even more troubling was the idea that Aria might be coming into our house when we weren't there, and Henry might be letting her. My father suggested that I store my valuables, including the cash cards, in their safe for now. As I thought about their need for money, William came over to my father, crying over his broken piggy bank and the promise he had made to save money. My father, furious about what had happened to William's piggy bank, vowed to call Henry. My mother suggested that I try to figure out what Henry and Aria were after. She pointed out that Henry might try to shift the blame to us, making the divorce more favorable for him. I decided to act calmly and find out what their true intentions were. I planned to secretly record their conversation. My father's lawyer friend also offered to help. When we returned home, I started cooking dinner while keeping my phone screen down, ready to record. It wasn't long before Henry arrived home, and to my surprise, he immediately asked about my cash cards. When I asked him about it, he gave vague answers, clearly trying to deceive me. When I remained silent, Henry grew more agitated. He demanded that I give him all of my part-time earnings for his sister. I refused and calmly explained that the money was for William's savings. In response, Henry angrily shoved the signed divorce papers toward me, declaring that I was living off his money and didn't need to save for William. He even said something that made my heart drop. He valued Aria more than our own son. Hearing this, I couldn't continue preparing the meal. I stopped, put the divorce papers in my bag, took William's hand, and walked toward the door. Henry shouted loudly, stating his serious intent for the divorce and ordering me never to come back. I responded firmly, telling him I wouldn't return to a house where a stranger could come and go freely. Once we left, Henry bombarded me with messages and calls, which I ignored. I turned off my phone and sought refuge at my parents' house. I shared the recording of our conversation and the divorce papers with them. Although I had no love or affection left for Henry, I couldn't stop worrying about how this would affect William. My parents understood my concerns and advised me to do what I felt was best. They acknowledged that a divorce could be emotionally hard on William, but they also supported my decision. As I was grappling with the decision, William told me he was hungry. My mother, seeing the distress on my face, kindly made hamburgers, his favorite dish. Overcome with emotions, tears welled up in my eyes as my mother lovingly told William that the hamburgers were made so that he and I could visit her whenever we wanted. William eagerly took a bite and joyfully exclaimed, "Grand's hamburgers. I want to eat these every day." I smiled and said, "It's because the hamburgers are filled with the love I have for you." Then, in a sweet gesture, William took a big bite of his hamburger and offered it to me. His kindness broke me, and even though I tried to stop my tears, they kept flowing. Noticing my tears, my father reassured William that they were tears of happiness, not sadness. William, in a moment of understanding, hugged me, and my father's eyes turned bright red. I realized how blessed we were to be together as a family. I looked at William and remarked, "Family is precious." Surprised, William asked, "Did Dad say that only Aria is family?" My father gently confirmed it, but then asked, "Would you like to live with us as family?" With a joyful laugh, William eagerly agreed, which made everyone smile. Despite still grappling with the idea of divorce, the meal was so warm and filled with love that I finally decided to part ways with Henry. I planned to tell William about it, even though my heart felt heavy. Yet somehow, I sensed that William already understood, even without me saying a word. The situation gradually settled, and William, in his innocence, expressed a desire to live as a family. He even embraced our pet dog, affectionately calling him his younger brother, despite the dog being older than him. His sweet gesture lightened the mood, and it felt like a small moment of joy amidst the turmoil. With my decision made, preparations for the divorce began in earnest. I contacted a lawyer who was a friend of my father's, and together, we started formalizing the contract. The next day, we signed the necessary papers, and while I took in the weight of what was happening, my father and William shared comforting laughter in the other room. They were trying to lift my spirits, but I was still processing everything. As I lay in bed that night, I found myself reminiscing about my childhood, when life was simpler, and I never imagined I'd be facing such a complicated, painful decision. The following day, I checked my smartphone and found over 200 missed calls and messages from Henry. His emotional instability was evident in every message. I felt exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained, and I decided to turn off my phone to avoid hearing more. With the lawyer's help, we explained everything to my parents. We shared how Arya had accumulated a significant amount of debt due to her casino habits and shopping addiction, and how Henry had acted as her guarantor. It was becoming clearer why he had been acting so erratically. They had been planning to use my savings to cover Arya's debts, and it explained so much about his recent behavior. The lawyer confirmed that the divorce papers had already been submitted. Henry was devastated when he realized it was final, and I could hear him sobbing on the other end of the phone. It was strange, his tears didn't move me. After everything that had happened, I couldn't find it in me to feel sorry for him. Despite the expectation of disagreements over child support, Henry agreed to sign a pledge to pay $340 every month for William's care. It was an amount that barely covered the essentials, but it was a small victory. Later, I received another call from Henry. His tone was different this time. There was no aggression. Instead, he calmly admitted to having manipulated me financially and explained his complex feelings toward Arya. He acknowledged his mistakes, but said nothing that could change my mind. I firmly stated that I had made my decision and wouldn't reconsider. I could hear his faint sobbing on the other end before he wished me happiness and hung up. I didn't even respond. As the call ended, I stayed strong, feeling a sense of resolve that I hadn't felt in months. I discussed my future plans with my parents. After much thought, I decided to stay with them until William grew up, giving us both the stability we needed. I resumed my role as the company president, something I had put on hold when Henry and I got married. I was determined to rebuild my life, not just for me, but for William as well. As time went on, I learned that Henry and Arya had informed their parents about the divorce and the mounting debts. The news was so shocking that it led to their disownment. For Henry, it was the final straw. His own family turned their back on him, leaving him to deal with the consequences of his actions. Looking back now, I find happiness in being with my family. We have our ups and downs, of course, but we have each other. I've come to realize that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who truly care, who lift you up when you're at your lowest, and who help you see the light at the end of the tunnel. I have William, my parents, and my own strength to carry me forward. In the end, that's what truly matters. My younger sister was secretly having an affair with my fiancé. When I uncovered their shocking plan to run away to Hawaii, I caught them red-handed in the bedroom. Furious, I confronted my sister, but she boldly said, "I'm marrying your fiancé." Even worse, my fiancé stood by her. Heartbroken, I walked away. But little did they know, I was coming back with a revenge so unexpected, it would leave them speechless. I had always thought I knew what betrayal looked like, but I never imagined it would come from the people I loved most. My name is Clara, and I'm 32 years old. I've spent most of my adult life as a journalist in Chicago, working hard to build a career I'm proud of. I used to believe that success could protect you from the ugliness of life. That if you just kept your head down and did the right thing, you'd be rewarded. But that all changed in one moment, a moment I'll never forget. It all started with Ethan. He was 35, handsome, wealthy, and so charming that I couldn't believe I was the one he'd chosen. I was the lucky one, or at least, that's what I thought. He had everything: money, power, confidence, and I loved him. I trusted him with all my heart. We'd been together for 2 years, and everything seemed perfect. We'd even planned our wedding, down to the smallest details, and I couldn't wait to begin our lives together. But the truth was, I wasn't the only one who felt lucky. There was someone else, someone I never thought would betray me. My younger sister, Lily. She was 25, and while I loved her, I often found her jealousy toward me hard to ignore. We had always been close growing up, but as we got older, I could feel the distance between us. She was always comparing herself to me, and no matter how much I tried to encourage her, she couldn't help but feel overshadowed by my career and the attention I received from people, including Ethan. One afternoon, everything changed. I had been feeling off, noticing that something wasn't right between me, Ethan, and Lily. They had always been friendly, but lately, something seemed different, distant, almost secretive. Maybe it was my gut telling me that something was wrong, or maybe I was just being paranoid. But whatever it was, it led me to check Lily's phone one night when she left it carelessly on the kitchen counter. I wasn't proud of what I did, but in that moment, I had to know. I scrolled through her messages without any intention other than to find the truth. Then I saw it. Texts between Lily and Ethan, planning a vacation to Hawaii together. They were speaking as if I wasn't even there. They were going to take a trip, a getaway to a tropical island. I froze, my heart racing in my chest. My hands shook as I read the words. It didn't make sense. Ethan, my fiancé, and my sister, the one person I thought would never hurt me, were planning something behind my back. They didn't just want a vacation. They were planning to enjoy their lives together while I was left completely in the dark. My mind was spinning. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. I knew I had to confront them. I couldn't just ignore this. So, I did what anyone would do in my situation. I confronted them. I waited until Ethan was over at my apartment, and I knew Lily would be there.
I had to see it for myself.
I remember the look on their faces when I walked into the living room, phone in hand, the evidence clear between us. Ethan was sitting on the couch, relaxed, as if nothing was wrong. Lily was standing by the window, her back to me, but I could feel the tension in the air. I didn't say anything at first. I just held out the phone for them to see. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling but resolute. Ethan's face went pale as he saw the screen. He looked at me, then at Lily, but said nothing. He was silent, and it felt like a lifetime passed before Lily turned around. She didn't even flinch. She didn't apologize or try to explain herself. Instead, she walked towards me, her face calm, almost too calm. "Clara," she said, her voice cold, "it's not what you think." I felt like my whole world had shifted. Not what I think. I was holding the evidence in my hand. "You're embracing my fiancé, Lily," I said, the words feeling foreign as they left my mouth. What else could it possibly be? Lily crossed her arms over her chest and looked me square in the eye. "I'm in love with him, Clara," she said. "I've been in love with him for a long time, and I'm not going to hide it anymore." My mind was reeling. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're my sister," I said, the hurt in my voice clear now. "How could you do this to me?" She stood her ground, never backing down. "It's not your business," she said, shrugging. "It's my personal life, and I'm not going to apologize for it. Ethan and I have decided to be together. We're planning to get married, Clara. We've been seeing each other behind her back for months now." The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I didn't know how to respond. My sister, the one I had always protected, always supported, was standing there admitting to betraying me, and Ethan just stood there, saying nothing. He didn't defend me, didn't apologize. He just stood by her side, silently supporting her. It was as if I didn't matter to either of them. "Say something," I said to Ethan, my voice barely above a whisper. But he remained quiet, just staring at me with that same blank expression on his face. And in that moment, I realized that everything I had believed in, everything I thought was real, had been a lie. The pain of that realization was almost unbearable. My heart felt like it was breaking, and yet I stood there, trying to keep it together. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I walked out of the room, my head spinning, my body numb. I couldn't stay there anymore. I needed to tell my parents. They had to understand what had happened, right? But when I got home, the response I got from them was not what I expected. They didn't react the way I thought they would. My father, sitting in his favorite chair, barely looked up from his newspaper when I told him about Ethan and Lily. "You're overreacting," he said, dismissing my pain. "They love each other, Clara. It happens." My mother, who had always been more supportive, tried to offer some comfort, but her words didn't feel like comfort at all. "They've made their choices, honey. You can't do anything about it. I was stunned. My own parents were justifying what had happened. They said I should accept it and move on. When I said I couldn't, they told me if I had a problem with it, I should leave. And that's when I knew. I knew I was completely alone.
No one was going to stand by me.
Not even my family. So I left. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I had to get out of that house. I couldn't stay there anymore, pretending like everything was okay. But what happened next was not something I could have ever expected. What I did next would change everything. I didn't just walk away. I wasn't going to let this betrayal slide. I was going to make them pay. The night I left my parents' house was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. I couldn't stay there, not after everything that had happened. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a world where betrayal was the currency of love. I had no one to turn to except myself. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew that I had to make them understand. Ethan and Lily needed to be exposed. They needed to feel the same hurt and humiliation I had felt. I was so angry, so devastated by the fact that both of them, my sister and the man I had trusted, had done this to me. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just let them go on with their lives like nothing had happened. The first thing I did was head to my apartment in downtown Chicago. It wasn't much, just a modest place for someone like me, working hard in a competitive industry, but it was mine. At least I still had that. After everything, I needed something to hold on to. I sat down at my desk, staring at my phone for a long time, unsure of what the next step should be. That's when I got the idea. Social media. I had a platform. I had followers, people who trusted me for the work I did as a journalist. If I could get my message out there, if I could expose what they had done, maybe it would hurt them the way they hurt me. I went through my photos, finding every picture of Ethan and Lily together that I could find. They weren't even trying to hide it. There were photos from vacations, dinners out, even a few of them laughing at some private joke. I'd seen them all before everything changed, but now, they were just reminders of the life I thought I had. I posted the pictures on my social media account along with a message. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't hide behind the pretense of politeness. I said exactly what I felt. This is the truth. My sister and my fiancé have been lying to me. They've been having an affair behind my back for months. I hope everyone enjoys this new couple because they're about to destroy everything I've ever worked for. I hit send. The next few hours were a blur. My phone exploded with messages. People I hadn't heard from in years reached out. Friends, colleagues, even strangers weighed in with comments of shock, support, and sympathy. Some people expressed disbelief, while others shared their own stories of betrayal. But the one thing I couldn't shake was the sense that Ethan and Lily didn't care. They were too wrapped up in their own world, in their own love affair, to worry about what I had just done. When I checked the posts the next morning, I saw they had both gone quiet. Ethan didn't respond. Lily didn't comment either. It was like they were pretending that nothing had happened, that I wasn't out there exposing the truth about them. But that didn't bother me. I knew they were both probably hiding from the public, trying to avoid the consequences of their actions. I wanted them to feel humiliated. I wanted them to regret ever hurting me. But that wasn't enough. I wasn't going to stop there. I couldn't just expose them to the public and walk away. I needed to make Ethan feel like everything he had built was about to fall apart. That's when I hired an investigator. I found a reputable investigator who specialized in looking into people's backgrounds. I told him everything about Ethan's past, about his wealth, about how he had been with me for so long without ever showing any sign of dishonesty. I wanted to know who he really was. I needed to know if there were more secrets hiding in the dark, just waiting to be uncovered. The investigator promised to dig deep, and within a few days I got the call. What he told me shocked me to my core. Ethan wasn't just some rich, charming man who had a few secrets. He was involved in multiple illegal relationships, using his money and influence to hide his activities. But that wasn't the worst part. Ethan was also running a smuggling operation, a large-scale, underground business that involved trafficking goods across borders. He had been using his wealth and connections to cover up his criminal activities. I couldn't believe it. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, had been living a double life. I felt sick to my stomach. How had I been so blind? How could I have trusted someone who had done something so horrible? But instead of feeling pity for Lily, I felt only anger. She had gotten involved with someone who wasn't just a liar but a criminal. I could have told her everything I knew. I could have exposed Ethan for what he truly was. But in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to warn her. She had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. I didn't need to protect her anymore. I was done. I went to bed that night, knowing the full extent of Ethan's actions. I knew that I had just uncovered a huge part of his life that he didn't want anyone to know. But my plan wasn't finished yet. I would make sure Ethan paid for what he had done. I would make sure that Lily understood the consequences of getting involved with someone like him. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them continue their lives while I was left broken. The next morning, the news hit. The authorities had uncovered Ethan's illegal business, and he was arrested for smuggling. It wasn't just Ethan. Lily was involved too. She hadn't known what Ethan was up to, but her connection to him had dragged her down with him. She was implicated in the entire operation, and now she was facing legal consequences for her part in his criminal dealings. I didn't feel relief or satisfaction. I didn't feel anything. The revenge I had sought was complete, but the hole in my heart was still there. I had won, but at what cost? I had exposed them both for what they really were. They were being punished for their actions, but that didn't bring me back what they had taken. And the worst part? My parents reached out to me, asking me to help release Lily from her legal troubles. They begged me to forgive her, to help her out of the mess she had gotten herself into. But I had already made up my mind. This wasn't my problem anymore. I told them, "This is your problem now. Never contact me again." I thought that once everything had been exposed, I would feel some sense of closure. I had set the wheels in motion, had taken my revenge. Ethan was arrested, Lily was implicated in his illegal activities, and my parents, well, they had their own set of problems to deal with. But in reality, nothing felt finished. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel satisfaction. All I felt was an emptiness, a hole where trust used to be, where love used to be. For weeks, I didn't hear from anyone. No one from my family reached out to check on me. The messages and calls I received from friends and even strangers were comforting, but they were hollow. The truth was, I had lost more than just my sister and fiancé. I had lost the family. I thought I knew. The people who should have supported me, who should have been by my side through this betrayal, had turned their backs on me. I focused on my work. I threw myself into my job as a journalist, thinking that if I just kept myself busy enough, I wouldn't have to think about what had happened. But no matter how hard I worked, my mind always went back to the same place, my parents, my sister, and Ethan. Then one day, out of the blue, I got a call from my mother. My heart sank when I saw her name on the caller ID. I hadn't spoken to her since I told her I was done. I didn't want to hear her excuses, didn't want to hear her try to justify what had happened. But despite everything, part of me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, she would show some understanding. I answered the phone, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "Clara," my mother's voice came through, soft but filled with guilt. "We need to talk." I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't sure what to say. The last time we spoke, I had made it clear that I didn't want any part of their drama anymore. But my mother was persistent, and for some reason I found myself listening. "I know you're hurt," she said, her voice shaky. "But you have to understand. We didn't know everything. We didn't know Ethan was involved in those things, and Lily, well, she's still my daughter. She's just a young girl. She made a mistake." A mistake. My blood boiled. A mistake? How could my own mother minimize what had happened? I wanted to scream, to tell her that it wasn't just a mistake, that Lily had betrayed me in the worst way possible. But I held my tongue. There was no point in arguing. "I can't help you with Lily," I said, my voice tight. "I've already told you. This is your problem now. I'm done. I won't be dragged back into this. Not after everything." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear the weight of her disappointment. "I understand," she said finally, "but just know we're sorry. We'll always be your family. We're just asking for your forgiveness. For Lily's sake." "Goodbye, Mom," I said, cutting her off before she could say more. I ended the call, the finality of it ringing in my ears. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had stood my ground. I wasn't going to allow myself to be dragged into their toxic world anymore. I wasn't going to keep forgiving them for things they had done to me. And just like that, I was free. But the truth was, even after everything, there was still a part of me that missed the old days. The times when my family had been whole, when everything felt right. But those days were gone now, and I couldn't live in the past. I couldn't keep wishing for things to go back to the way they were. I had to move forward for my own sake. And I did. I moved forward with my life, focusing on what truly mattered. My career, my independence. The truth was, I was stronger now, more resilient than ever. Ethan and Lily had tried to tear me down, but they had only made me realize how much strength I had within me. I had come out of this mess with my head held high, and for the first time in months, I started to feel like myself again. But there was still one thing left to do. I didn't need their forgiveness. I didn't need their approval. All I needed was to keep moving forward, to build a life for myself, one where I could be free of the past, free of the betrayal, and free of them. And that's exactly what I planned to do. The anger, the pain, it was all starting to fade. Slowly but surely. It was time to let go, time to start fresh. I had taken my revenge, and now it was time to rebuild my life. And nothing, not even my past, was going to stop me. The days after I made the decision to sever all ties with my family were quiet, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. The storm of emotions that had ravaged my life for months seemed to settle, and in its place, there was a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in years. I was no longer living in the shadow of betrayal, no longer drowning in the expectations and manipulation that had defined my relationships with my family. I focused entirely on my career. As a journalist, I had always been driven, but the past few months had given me a clarity I hadn't realized I needed. Writing became my escape, my sanctuary. It was the one thing in my life that remained steady and true, and I threw myself into it with a renewed passion. For the first time, I felt like I was reclaiming my power, not just in my career, but in every part of my life. But even as I threw myself into my work, there were moments when my past would creep back in, memories of Ethan, of Lily, of the family I had once been so close to. I could still see my mother's face, filled with that desperate hope for reconciliation, and hear my father's dismissive words about getting over it. But the more time passed, the more I realized something. No matter how much they tried to justify their actions, I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval, their excuses, or their toxic love. One evening, as I sat in my apartment after a long day of work, I received an unexpected call. I hesitated for a moment before picking up, unsure of who would be calling me now. When I saw the number, I froze. It was from my mother. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but something inside told me I needed to hear what she had to say. Clara, her voice was tentative, careful. We've been through so much, and I know things have been hard. But I want you to know that I've been thinking a lot about everything. I'm sorry, truly sorry, for the way we treated you. My heart twisted, not because I was glad to hear from her, but because I could hear the regret in her voice. I had longed for this kind of acknowledgement, but now it felt distant, like it came too late. I don't know what to say, I responded, my voice steady but guarded. I've heard your apologies before. And honestly, I don't think they mean anything anymore. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could sense her disappointment, but I didn't care anymore. I just wanted you to know that we're sorry, she said again. And I hope, one day, you can forgive us. I took a deep breath before answering. Maybe I will, Mom. But not today. Not now. We said our goodbyes, and I ended the call. As I sat there, reflecting on what had just happened, I realized something important. My forgiveness wasn't for them, it was for me. But it had to come on my terms. I wasn't going to let my family's mistakes dictate my happiness or my future. And that was the last time I ever spoke to them. A few months later, as I continued to rebuild my life, I met someone new. His name was Matthew. He wasn't anything like Ethan. He was kind, thoughtful, and patient. He didn't come with a hidden agenda or dark secrets. He simply appreciated me for who I was. I didn't rush into anything. After everything that had happened, I wasn't ready to open my heart completely. But with time, Matthew showed me that it was possible to trust again. We took things slowly, but I knew deep down that I was healing little by little. One day, as I sat with Matthew at a cafe, watching the sunset, I realized how far I had come. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up. The pain from my past no longer controlled me. I was stronger now, wiser, even. And most importantly, I was free. I still thought about Lily and Ethan, of course. They were my family, after all, and the memories of what they had done to me would never fully go away. But I had learned to live with it, to accept that not everything could be fixed, and not all relationships were worth saving. I had let go of the past, and in doing so, I had found peace. As I walked down the path with Matthew, I couldn't help but smile. Life wasn't perfect, but I had finally created a life that was mine, one built on trust, honesty, and love. And for the first time in a long time, I was happy. No longer bound by the expectations of others, I had found the freedom to choose my own path, and that was all that mattered now. And that was my true revenge. Not in hurting them, but in finding my own peace, my own happiness, without them.